5 a.m. We will call this meeting to order. It's an emergency city council meeting, and I am going to turn it over to Teresa James.
Thank you, Mayor. As you know, there was an emergency declaration that was declared on Saturday regarding the tornado. Today's action is a resolution that is addressing some outstanding issues. Excuse me. The first is, thing we want you to do is waive water late fees for the Bradford neighborhood. The second thing this resolution does is waiving building permit fees for all storm-related damage. The next thing is to...
Teresa, could we just stop at that moment and clarify
Absolutely.
specifically, because I want to make sure people understand the fees are being waived, but they still need to go and ask for a building permit. So let's make sure we're clear on that issue.
That is correct. They still need to make sure they get a permit, and they need to make sure they're using a licensed contractor.
Is that within a specific area?
No, that is citywide, actually. We're also waiving the 10-day, or the requirement that lets us dispose of strays or have strays adopted. We're extending that to 10 days.
What if your animal was picked up and taken to the animal shelter during this time period?
We're waiving the fees for redemption for those animals.
And we did take some in, is that correct?
I think Morgan is here. She could probably answer that question a little bit.
Because I know
better.
some people asked me about looking for animals that had run from the house. I just want to know where we stand on that.
It was a slightly above average intake for over the weekend, and it is not clear what part of town those animals came from, but we are taking extra measures to post those available animals to improve reunification with family.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the other action that this resolution takes is it's approving an emergency debris removal contract. We have a local provider who has offered those services to us. We actually started the contract yesterday for a not-to-exceed value. If you approve this resolution today, that not-to-exceed value will go away. And then we're asking that you allocate $250,000 of the solid waste fund balance to pay for some of these charges right now. We are collecting all of the hours that we're working on the emergency so that we can request reimbursement for those, but until that reimbursement happens, we'd like to have some funds available so that we can pay for services as they're needed.
Okay. Is that it, Teresa?
I believe that is all. We're also authorizing Daniel to execute any and all documents that will be necessary, so we don't have to come back for approval within the next 2 weeks for anything related to the storm.
Okay, thank you.
So is there a time limit for the building permit side?
Yeah, it's going to be 6 months.
Can we extend that?
I guess what we decided was that we would extend it if necessary, but we were going to leave that in place for now. If it needs to be extended, we'll bring it back at another future city council meeting.
Okay, I know there's a lot of people that 6 months might not be enough time to get the funds to rebuild.
Right, and the extension or the waiving of the water fees is for a period of 30 days, and the fees for the animal services, I believe, is until June 4th, which is 10 business days from the date of this resolution. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer those for you.
Any kind of time frame on the tree removal whatsoever, that last item you mentioned?
On the contract, no. Those guys typically perform that service until it's done. When Shane and I talked about it yesterday, he had spent all of his time in the neighborhood, so he didn't have a really good grasp on even how much debris there was citywide in the first place. So,
Does council have any further questions for Teresa on this resolution? Then may I ask for a motion to approve the resolution?
I make a motion to approve.
I'll
Billy
second.
making a motion. Lane seconds the motion. Any public comment? With no public comment, we will take a vote. All in support, say aye.
Aye.
With none opposed, resolution passes.
Mayor, if I may,
Yes, you may.
I just want to thank, the response was tremendous to this disaster. We had a lot of volunteers that went out there. A lot of people were affected, and it was tough walking around there as we did and talking to citizens. But overwhelmingly, the first responders, our citizens, there's just so many people that responded to the disaster, and I feel so privileged and honored to be a member of this community. And it was just a thing of beauty. I just got no other way to explain it. It kind of chokes me up even talking about it, because you walk around and you see the despair in people's eyes. And then the appreciation, the gratitude that they shared with us for all the support that they received from everyone. So again, I just very thankful for everyone that participated. Very thankful to my staff as well, the first responders, and a person that's been out there, I mean, around the clock, Shane Kelton. He's done a tremendous job for us too. So that's what I wanted to add, Mayor. I don't know, I'm sure you had something.
I'd like to add a little bit to that as well. You know, no one likes to see that kind of devastation in any neighborhood, but I will tell you one, for me, I was incredibly proud of how quickly the city responded, from everyone from our emergency management, Jim Evans, to our fire, our police, Shane Kelton. I don't know if he's slept yet, but the response from the city was tremendous, and the Bradford neighborhood has been so appreciative to see how quickly we responded. But I also want to thank several organizations. The home builders went out in force yesterday and did tremendous amount of work. Caltech folks were out there yesterday. Burke Monument people were there yesterday. Salvation Army, Red Cross. A special shout out to Michael Looney and to Roger Horton. They came with chainsaws and did tremendous amount of work on Sunday. It was mind-boggling how many trees they cut down off of houses and cleared yards and got limbs out of the way so people could actually get to their cars and out of their driveways. The response, everyone in this community should be so proud of the work and effort that was put into this neighborhood. And so thank you to each and every one of you who were there to help. Lucy?
I would just like to say a few words. My District 4 is the Bradford area, and I was out of state, so as soon as I got into town, I went out there and I talked to a couple of people, and like Daniel and the mayor just said, you know, they were so appreciative of people taking the time to go and see how they were and how they could help them. And it was just amazing because the first thing that they said was, we're okay. And that was mainly what was most important to them. And I do want to thank God that no one got hurt and no lives were taken. And I also want to thank the people that came from out of town to help our community. And I just want to say that we're here to help these people in any way that we can. And I just want them to know that I ask God to help them and to keep them safe. Thank you.
Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
In a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
None opposed, motion passes. To adjourn the emergency city council meeting, so we will now move into our regular city council agenda. We will start with a chaplain prayer. Marcella Jenkins from our police department, if you would come forward.
Our Honorable Mayor, Brenda Gunter, to our esteemed City Council, to the City Manager, to all the department heads, and everyone that's here, good morning. I guess I need to get to the mic. Good morning. Let's pray. Precious Father in heaven, in the name of Jesus, as we come before your presence, Lord, we're so thankful and so grateful that no lives was lost, Lord. Even though there was destruction, Lord, our prayers go out to those that have lost their homes or their possessions, God. We ask you to replenish right now in the name of Jesus. And we've been mindful to give you and you alone the praise, the glory, and the honor. Father God, as we come before your holy presence, seeking the counsel and favor over today's city council meeting, we ask that you please have mercy, incline thy ear, and hear our prayer. We honor and worship and praise your holy name. It is written in 2 Chronicles, if my people which are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and forgive their sins and heal their land. Holy Father, forgive us of all our sins, that our lives may be honorable to you, God, and let nothing hinder our prayers from being acceptable to you. I ask you to let the business that's about to be conducted today be done in a way that will glorify you and edify to all. We ask for your blessings over our Honorable Mayor Brenda Gunter, our esteemed city council. We ask your blessings over the department heads and here in the city of San Angelo. We ask you that you bless each and every one that's here, God, and we will continually give you the praise, the glory, and the honor. So thank you, Holy Father, for hearing us, and we pray that your will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Hallelujah, Lord. And in the matchless holy name of Jesus Christ, we pray. We thank you so much for being an awesome God and letting the storm pass us on last night. Amen.
We will now do our pledges, and today we are honored with Anna James, who is an 11th grader at Central High School, and she'll lead us in our pledges today.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, God, one and indivisible.
We're abusing a little power. Yeah, look at my daughter, look at me. Teresa, was this the one with the crutches?
She is the one with the crutches.
All right.
We will now move into our proclamations and our recognitions, and we will start off this morning with a certificate of recognition for the Central High School girls gymnastics team. Come on up, girls. Around me. This certificate of recognition says the following: the City Council of the City of San Angelo hereby recognizes and applauds the Central High School girls gymnastics team for winning their 9th state team title in the 2019 Texas High School State Gymnastics Championships. Congratulations.
Anna's in the back. She was in the back.
No.
Thank you so much for the recognition. There's been a great partnership between Central High School and the City of San Angelo regarding our gymnastics team. We've been partnerships and hosting 7 state championships here, and with the recognition that we're receiving these days, maybe it's time to host another one again. So thank you so much for the honor.
Okay, go. You ruined their day.
Do a cartwheel.
Little cartwheel.
Yeah, and then one would trip and fall.
Exactly.
As they
It'd be
get
Teresa's fault.
Exactly. We will now have a proclamation of May 2019 as National Historic Preservation Month. Dell, are you here? Right there. Sorry. The month of May is National Historic Preservation Month. The National Trust for Historic Preservation established the, quote, "This Place Matters," quote, campaign. Downtown San Angelo, Inc. has been a vital organization promoting the preservation of history, culture, and significant structures in historic downtown San Angelo, Texas, and has partnered with Fort Concho, one of the oldest preservation projects of its kind in the nation. The City of San Angelo has supported the efforts of Downtown San Angelo, Inc. in its endeavors, which have fostered economic development, preserved its history through promotional activities, and preserved the integrity of its historic structures and architectural integrity. Downtown San Angelo, Inc. has been an integral partner with the City of San Angelo in advocating tourism in the Central Business District. Downtown San Angelo, Inc. has received 2019 National Main Street Accreditation for the 11th year in a row, a mark of the success of this community's commitment to preservation. Therefore, I, Brenda Gunter, Mayor of the City of San Angelo, Texas, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim May 2019 as National Historic Preservation Month in San Angelo, Texas, and call upon all in the City of San Angelo to support the continued efforts of preservation in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. You know, downtown San Angelo has been in existence for 14 years. This summer we'll be celebrating. And though we've made strides, there's a long road still ahead that needs to be taken care of. Preservation certainly has been a key factor in making those things happen. And as the mayor just read, our culture, our history, and I don't want to forget our unique buildings. We have some incredibly unique historic buildings in downtown San Angelo. And thanks to City Council for its support. The city government has been super supportive of our efforts. Sometimes the word preservation in my mind is synonymous with perseverance because it takes a long time to help develop the downtown historic district. So thank you all for your support, gentlemen and ladies, and thank you for the community that supports us every day.
We will now move into the public comment time period, so I'm going to remind myself to put my phones on silent or vibrate and ask that you all do the same. Issues or items that are not on the regular agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, begin by stating their name, and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Council members may request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The council takes public comment on all regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. Is there anyone here today who would like to come forward and offer some public comment? Anthony, are you coming forward?
Good morning, Council. Anthony Wilson, the Communications Director for the City of San Angelo. Just wanted to remind you about two important things. First, we talked about the storm already this morning, but all of our storm-related information is available on our website. And of course, it's a very fluid situation, so we are updating that information on almost an hourly basis. But it's on our webpage at cosatx.us, and you can find it both at the top, middle, and bottoms of the page. And of course, we also have that on the City of San Angelo Public Information Facebook page and on our Twitter account. Also, Monday is Memorial Day, so all city offices, most city offices, will be closed on Memorial Day. Just a reminder that this is the opening weekend of our municipal pool. Fort Concho will also be engaged in some activities on Memorial Day. And of course, it'll be a very busy season in our lake parks, and they'll be charging admission fees and camping fees. So for all of that information, also go to our website, cosatx.us. You can find everything you need to know about Memorial Day. But if you have city business, conduct it this week because we'll be closed on Monday.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Bruce?
Morning, City Council. Bruce Partain, CEO, San Angelo Chamber of Commerce. Just wanted to make just a comment about this last weekend. The Chamber does an annual Goodfellow Appreciation Day at the River Stage typically, and we had our own challenges, but I just want to hats off to city staff, especially Steve and TJ and Art and Fernando, who really helped us get things put back together very quickly. You have an awesome community events staff that takes care of this building, certainly north at the Stock Show and Rodeo Grounds, the Spur Arena and those facilities, but also the River Stage, a lot of territory to cover, and the lake. We were prepared to feed over 2,500 people. We fed about 850, and then the food that we had left over and the water have been dispersed up to Bradford Elementary, where the Texas Baptist Men and the Red Cross have helped feed a bunch of volunteers, including some of those city workers who work so hard. To see them volunteers, but also city staff and county staff, has been a real blessing, and it just reinforces everyone's resilience and the fact that San Angelo is a tight, hardworking community, and we appreciate the fact that the city of San Angelo is blessed with so many hardworking employees and volunteers like yourself. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I forgot to say thank you to the Salvation Army and the Red Cross earlier, and I also want to say a big thank you to AEP. I know they've brought a lot of people in from other cities. Uvalde sent a lot of their people up here, but they have been working nonstop trying to get electricity back up to everyone. So I think they originally had about 30,000 down. I think they're down to maybe 900, but mostly in the Bradford area, right,
So
Daniel?
they brought it down to about 500 now, but yes, you're correct. It's mostly in the Bradford area, and they're just trying to make sure that everything's secured before power comes back on. So we don't want any water on the ground, any lines on the ground, so they're making sure that everything's repaired properly.
Okay. All right. With that, is there any further public comment?
City
Morning.
Council. I talked with Harry and some others already, and first I want to congratulate the city on how amazing of a job we did to come together and still pull off an amazing blues fest in the middle of a storm, and just everything that was done. It just goes to show you why we've chose to come here and open our businesses. I work with a organization called Reach Out Worldwide. It was a good friend of mine, started in his name, Paul Walker. They do disaster relief, and I've been in contact with them and let them know what's going on, and they've already said, let them know what they can help with, let them know what they need, and I'm coordinating with them. They've already got their people in action and ready to head this way if need so. And we've also decided to cease operations with One Solar and Godspeed Technologies, and dedicated all of our employees to whatever needs to be done just to step forward and help the community and just be here to help start rebuilding and be a part of this, because we've all got to band together, and this is when we really need to come together. And that's one thing that is such an honor to be a part of this city and to be on the DHRC board. I know we're going to play a role in the future on trying to get this done, and we all need to remember to just work together as hard as we can and get all this taken care of. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any further public comment? With no further public comment, we will move into our consent agenda. I am going to ask to pull items O through T off of the consent agenda. Billy, do you have any item that you'd like to pull? Lane? Lucy?
No, ma'am.
Tom? Tommy? Harry?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Mayor, if we could, item L as well for the
Item L?
resolution. Yes, ma'am.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the items with the exception of L, O, P, Q, R, S, T? Second?
Second.
And a second. All in public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
With none opposed, consent agenda approved. Item L, we are moving to the regular agenda. First item on the regular agenda. And then I just have a couple questions on the fees. If you'll, Tina, I know in going through the documents last night that some of the fees proposed, were they updated with the conversation that we had at last city council meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
The reason I question it is because we were pretty specific about what we wanted done with those fees, and it was to take them up to the next, like if it was 107, we wanted it to go to 110. If it was 101, it'd be 100. If it was 103, it was 105.
Yes, ma'am.
And those numbers are not reflected in these documents.
Okay, well, Kimberly, our budget manager, was taking notes as we went through, and so if there are any discrepancies there, I'd be happy to know what they are so that we can make that change right now.
I don't know if we want to go through all of them, or if we can ask that that be done, or do we need to make those, go through them item by item?
We don't need to make that, we can just make it part of the motion that they'll
Okay.
correct it.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one other question on one, let's see. And it was on the
Mayor.
Yes.
Could we have clarification? Do you want to round it up to the next $1, $5, $10?
I think what we made the motion, it would be like, to be, like if it was 101, it'd be 100. If it was 104, it'd be 105. If it was 109, it'd be 110. So it's rounding up to the next.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying, and no, we weren't clear that that was what you wanted.
Yes.
So definitely, that'll be easy. We can make
Yes.
that change.
Okay, thank you.
To round to the nearest $5 or
Yes.
$10 mark, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I had a question on, specifically on the item on the parking lot permit fee.
Okay.
And my question is really to do with planning, not really the fee number itself, but want to make sure, because in the regular agenda, we're going to be talking about parking lots and parking, and I think we need to be clear on this before we move into that, because I want a better explanation of what this parking lot permit fee is. Is it a fee that's just a fee? Is it, we won't approve your parking lot if it has a pothole, or what is this?
John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. This actually has nothing to do with the potholes and that side of things. This is basically, right now, if a new business is going in, if they're building a building, they're getting a building permit, we review their parking lot for conformance with our parking lot standards. If all they're doing is going out and building a parking lot, or they're expanding a parking lot, we currently have no way, there's no mechanism that triggers the review to ensure that they're in compliance with the parking. And so this parking lot permit would basically only be where somebody is going out and expanding or building a new parking lot that's not related to a building permit, then this permit would apply.
So when they apply for this, it's not going to kick in a review of the existing condition of the parking lot?
Well, no, not of an existing parking lot. That's correct.
Just to be very clear, because I've had many phone calls, and we'll go into further discussion with it on the regular agenda item, but I just need to make sure before we pass this.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Julia?
I just wanted to make sure that we included the rounding in the motion, and we can take a motion for items O through T together if you wanted to.
Yes, yes. Tom, do you want to make that motion?
Sure, I make the motion we approve O through T as suggested with rounding to the nearest $5 increment.
Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
With none opposed, consent agenda items O through T have passed. We will now move into the regular agenda. Oh. Well, I know I was going to move right now because I just moved into the regular agenda, and I thought that's what we were going to do first. Okay. So we are moving into the regular agenda and starting with what was item L in the consent agenda. And, yes, is there a question? Okay. All right, so L is consider a resolution naming San Angelo, Texas as a sister city to Agreda, Spain. And Daniel, you want to?
Yes, ma'am.
Agreda, sorry, Agreda.
Agreda, yes. Cities typically do a sister city arrangement with other foreign cities. A lot of times those that are closely related to those communities. This one actually has a historical significance that we'll hear in just a little bit, but it is something that's closely connected to Our Lady in Blue. Of course, we have that beautiful statue on the river right now that actually is connected to Agreda, Spain. And Mayor, I know we do have a resolution, and I would ask that you read the resolution, but I would also ask either Sandy Seidel or anyone that's here with the Lady in Blue to come up here and kind of talk about this item as well. You can do it right here. Yeah.
Cindy, I'll read the resolution, and then if you will speak.
Sure.
Thank you. This resolution of the City of San Angelo, Texas, acknowledging the shared history with Agreda, Spain, and declaring the cities sister cities. Whereas Sor Maria de Jesus de Agreda, a cloistered nun in Agreda, Spain, is believed to have bilocated to what is now Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, while still physically in her convent from 1620 to 1631. And whereas Sor Maria de Jesus de Agreda evangelized the natives in these areas, and whereas Sor Maria de Jesus de Agreda fervently encouraged the natives to request baptism and to travel a long journey to the mission, which still sits along the Camino Real de Tierra Adentro. How do you spell that? This one.
Adentro.
In what is now Isleta Pueblo, by what is now known as Albuquerque, New Mexico, and whereas Sor Maria de Jesus de Agreda's work encouraged thousands of humanos to request baptism in what is now known as Texas, thus prompting the first mission, San Clemente, to be built at the convergence of the Concho and Colorado rivers, known then as the Nueces and San Clemente rivers. And whereas Sor Maria de Jesus de Agreda is depicted in pictographs at Paint Rock near the region now known as San Angelo, Texas, and whereas the early history of the region around what is now San Angelo, Texas, is so richly intertwined with Spain, and especially in this case its connection to the Concepcionist convent in Agreda, Spain, and whereas the citizens of the city of San Angelo have celebrated the encounter between Sor Maria de Jesus and Humana Indians, which has brought to light this shared history. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the City Council of the City of San Angelo, Texas, Part 1, that because of the citizens' appreciation of the shared history between Agreda, Spain, and San Angelo, Texas, the two cities are forever deemed sisters on this 21st day of May, 2019. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and the City Council. Wow, who wouldn't want to be a sister city to us after what we've heard today? It is amazing. And I'm honored to be here today representing the committee of the Lady in Blue. Part of us, some of us are here today. Would you like to stand? Some of us who are here. And some of us are in Rome on the way to see the Pope tomorrow and taking resolution that we received from the Texas State Legislature on last Wednesday, May 15th, recognizing the Humano Indians nation as a tribe in the state of Texas. So it's with a privilege that I represent Sor Maria and our committee and the Humanos, hoping for approval for the resolution of what was read. And just to say that if you haven't visited the statues down at the river, they're fabulous. 2,500 pounds of bronze representing our city and what's happened here. And knowing that Agreda has a great place in our hearts because of Maria, and the committee that's in Rome visiting with the Pope tomorrow, hoping for canonization for Maria, then they will go to Agreda on Thursday and representing our city. And so we're hoping to take a copy of this approval of the resolution there tomorrow.
Road trip. So.
I would like to ask for a motion from council to approve and accept the resolution.
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion by Lane, a second by Lucy. Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
None opposed. The resolution support passes 7-0. We'll move then into the next item, which is listed on the agenda as item A. Consider accepting the city's fiscal year 2018 comprehensive annual financial report and single audit. And today we have Gayla Thornton, I think, who's going to present, or Tina is.
Yes, ma'am. I just want to introduce Gayla Thornton from Armstrong Backus and Company. She is the partner in charge of our annual audit. She's just going to give you a brief overview of the results of our 2018 financial statements.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. On behalf of Armstrong Backus, thank you for engaging our firm once again to audit your financial statements for the year ended September 30, 2018. On March 28th, we met with the Audit Committee appointed by the City Council and discussed the CAFR in detail. The purpose of our audit is to come in and make sure that your financial statements are reasonably stated in accordance with U.S. GAAP. And that GAAP for governments is set by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And they set the policies that give guidelines to how your transactions are recorded, how your financial statements are presented. So we do a series of tests and review to make sure that everything is reported appropriately. We do this mainly through risk assessment. We go in and we determine where the biggest areas of risk are in the government. We put a lot of focus on those areas. We look hard at water and sewer just because it's public funds that, have tend to be heavily scrutinized in the past. We do a lot of detail work there. But we look at everything. If it's material, we look at it. We don't look at 100% of your transactions, but if they're risky, if they're material, we do spend some time with that. So as a result, this year you had a clean opinion, or what we call an unmodified opinion. So your financial statements are reasonably stated in accordance with GAAP. If you were to look at this CAFR compared to prior years, there is a change, and it's by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and it's what's called GASB 75, and it's how you report your OPEB plan, which is your retiree health. It's very, very material to this financial statement. This retiree health plan is a plan that you've had for many years. It was frozen in the year 2000, so new hires aren't eligible to participate. But if you were hired before the year 2000, you can be part of this plan. And so the obligation to pay retiree health premiums in the future has always been there. It's just never been required to be reported in your financial statements. As a result, we had a prior period adjustment of $90 million to add a liability that has always been an obligation of the city. It's just never been reported. So if you were to look at your net position last year and your net position this year for the beginning of the year, it decreased by $90 million, which is significant. This is a value that's actuarially determined. The city uses a firm called Holmes Murphy, and they're the ones that go in and apply assumptions, look at claims history, participants, and they're the ones that give the value of this OPEB liability. So it is significant, it is a change. It, again, is something that the city has always been required to fund, and it's just now it's in black and white in your financial statements. We also performed what's called a single audit. This is when you have federal funding in excess of $750,000. You all have federal grants in the amount of $6 million. So because of that, we have to go in and do a compliance audit to make sure that you're spending those federal funds in accordance with their guidelines. And we didn't find any compliance issues, so it was a good single audit. And then just to kind of give you an overall snapshot, there's a lot of numbers in this CAFR that we help the finance department prepare. And at the end of the year, if you took the entire government together, you had a net position or an equity of $38 million. And that's after $600 million of assets, $430 million of liabilities. So you do have enough assets to support your liabilities. So you still have, even after your $90 million adjustment, you still have a positive net
You
position.
might want to repeat that, because I'm quite sure that when the public hears that we have a $90 million liability that has always been there but not necessarily as visible in the documents, you want to make sure we explain again that liability, there's enough assets to take care of the liability.
Your assets do exceed your liabilities by $38 million. And then that 90 million is over the period of many, many years that you have to pay this out, and you have been meeting your current obligations through your current year budget every year. So that's not going to change. As long as y'all keep budgeting what you have to pay out each year, you're going to be fine. But yeah, that $90 million has just never been shown in the financial statements.
When you talk about the liability number, that 90 million is in that liability number,
Yes,
just
ma'am.
to be clear.
It is, yes, ma'am. Are there any questions?
I have questions from council. Yes, Harry?
I happen to sit on the audit committee, so I want to say I appreciate the thoroughness of Gayla and her team going through the books and finding out that we already know, and that is we've got a financial group, an accounting office that does an excellent job. So appreciate the thoroughness of it, and appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you. And thank you to city staff for all their help in helping us finish this audit.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, please, Billy.
And I hope this doesn't come across as a negative question, but you said the 90 million had been overlooked, being captured for a number of years, or I didn't exactly understand why we're just posting that to our documents now.
Previously, governmental accounting standards didn't require that you report it. In history, governments didn't report many of their long-term debts. They didn't report their pension. Still in the fund financial part of the report, they don't report long-term liabilities. But over time, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board wanted government reports to look more like business reports, and so they've started adding these liabilities every few years that have always been there. They've just never been required to be reported. So they weren't overlooked. They weren't required to be in your financial statements.
They were in the notes.
They've always been disclosed in the notes. Right.
And I think a lot of it's because there have been so many cities who the liabilities have not, or their assets don't exceed the liabilities, and so many cities or municipalities have been in trouble.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Helps me understand it better.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, if I could,
Yes,
one
please,
other
Michael.
comment. Gayla and her folks participate on in our audit committee meetings. They are not required to be there. They're not members. They don't vote, but they attend, so they know us, and they give us advice when we're dealing with tough issues, and so we appreciate that extra effort.
I just think it's very important that the citizens understand that this city has the assets exceeding the liabilities. We have $38 million assets exceeding liabilities. So we understand the healthiness of our financial statement.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gayla.
Thank you.
We need a motion to accept
We need
it.
to, okay,
Need a
so
vote.
may
So
I have a
moved.
motion? Harry has made a motion. Do I have a second? Second by Lucy. Do we have public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With none opposed, item A passes. We will move into item B, which is the second reading of an ordinance amending Chapter 12, Planning and Development, Exhibit A, Zoning Ordinance, Section 511, Off-Street Parking Standards, and Section 512, Loading Standards, establishing new standards and revisions to existing standards for parking and loading. John, welcome.
Thank you. John James, Director of Planning and Development Services. This will be brief. If you have any questions, I'm not going to go through the whole ordinance like I did last time. This is second reading. But we had some questions come up on the requirement for, or not the requirement, but the enforcement of deteriorating parking lots. And so while we still support the current draft, which basically says all parking areas have to be passable and drivable, we've suggested a possible amendment, if that's your direction you'd like to go, of limiting that passable and drivability to required fire lanes. As I mentioned last time, one of the concerns that was raised was ensuring that emergency vehicles can adequately access a site. This would be the minimal amount that we would think would be necessary to ensure that. And so really just presenting this as two options for you to consider as you approve this on second reading.
Thank you, John, because I made a comment that most of the items that people were concerned about had been addressed in this, but I continue to get a lot of phone calls, and it was about this specific statement, and it's about making it, as the possible amendment, better describes what we, the city, will be doing, not inspecting and writing up tickets, if you will, on parking lots. So I think this better designates what I think people think the limitation should be. Billy, do you have a question?
I do,
Comment?
Mayor. I likewise got calls and I got emails with pictures and comments to pay attention to all the potholes in the streets rather than on private parking lots, some of the comments that I received. But it just so happened within the last week, I have been on 3 parking lots that had really, really deep holes. And so my question is, can citizens that are encountering safety issues with potholes in parking lots somehow report that? I know we, as our code compliance won't be going around inspecting parking lots, but can citizens do anything about it?
The short answer from the city's perspective is no. We get those calls, I wouldn't say regularly, but we do get those calls with complaints. And right now we tell them there's no city ordinance that requires a business parking lot to be maintained. When they come in to build a brand new parking lot, we ensure that it's paved, good asphalt, concrete, whatever. But if they let it deteriorate over time, we have nothing in the ordinances that would allow us to make them repair that. That was kind of the intent of this section. But again, that's not something that every city does. If they want to let their parking lot deteriorate, one of the options is they may lose business because of that, and that's up to the business owner to decide if it's worth it. But
I think that's the appropriate approach. Certainly a citizen can complain to the business owner, and if they don't like the condition of the parking lot, not go back there. But I just don't want us to be so heavy-handed with ordinances that, and that's the concern of the citizens, is that we're kind of going beyond heavy-handed.
I have another
Yes,
question,
Billy.
Mayor. John, am I understanding correctly that current businesses will be grandfathered in, with the new parking lot restrictions or parking lot ordinance? Will current businesses be grandfathered in?
Well, this provision is for all parking lots, existing included. Now, the rest of the ordinance that we're talking about only really applies if you're coming in for a building permit or coming in for building a new parking lot. That's the only times now we look at what you're building on your parking lot. So to that extent, no, if you don't comply with the parking lot spacing, for example, this ordinance would not have us go out and make them change that. So those would be grandfathered. This one provision here about passability for emergency vehicles, that would apply to all businesses. They would not be grandfathered from that.
The other question I have is, and I don't know what part of this it was, but there was the item that said that if it was an existing business that had been empty for 1 year, over 1 year, then they had to comply with the new parking lot, number of parking spots, et cetera. But in that case, I think we need to reevaluate that 1 year, and I think it needs to be 3 years, because if you're a building that's between 2 other businesses, how can you get more parking? You can't. You're landlocked, if you will. So I think having a 1 year limit in terms of grandfathering the existing parking conditions, because some of these empty buildings will take more than a year once they're emptied and put on the market and get resold or released, et cetera. So I think we need to have more time allowed on that item. And I'm not sure where it is in this. But I know it was mentioned if it was empty for over 1 year, then they had to address the new parking standard. So an old restaurant might have had only 20 parking spots, to a business on its left and on its right, it can't get more parking spots. And so why would we want it to be empty and not usable in that case?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, 1 second. I think Harry had a question first, Lane.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that section. I actually don't recall a provision that.
It came up in the conversation at last meeting, so I know it's there.
When we were talking with Steve Eustace.
That's correct. And Harry, while he's looking, you want to make a comment or a question?
I think this really is overall, not specifically just to parking spaces. This really has to do with the building being empty for more than a year, being grandfathered in a lot of different ways. And I think it just overall just takes in the parking spaces as well. So if you take a look at it, it's a larger issue than that. Personally, I can see both sides of this, but I'd rather keep it at a year simply because if you can't get something in there in a year, then they got to conform to what the standard is for everybody else.
I think you're correct. The discussion we had last time on that was pertaining to the broader view of how we currently handle things.
So it's very specific about a one-year thing, and I want to make sure we go over that.
And that's not in the parking ordinance itself. That's the general non-conforming standards in the zoning ordinance. And basically what it says is if you're grandfathered, you get to continue as is. But if you're vacant for a year and then you reopen, you have to meet all current standards. But that's not specific to parking. That would include everything within the zoning ordinance.
Then we need to bring that back up again, because again, if you have a business on the left and a business on the right, there's no way you're going to get more. You're not. It's not there, as they say, landlocked. So if it's not part of this, although this was part of the conversation we had last time when this parking lot thing came up. So if it's not specific in this, we need to bring it back and have a discussion about it to address it.
I will say this ordinance does have what we call an alternative parking plan where they can submit a rationale similar to a variance, although they still have a variance option as well. So a business in a circumstance like you're describing where they're landlocked, they can't expand parking. We've actually had some of those recently where we've granted them the ability to have less parking than would normally be required because of that circumstance. So there is a built-in mechanism to address those specific situations.
And what would that variance cost somebody to go get?
Well, for that alternative parking, that does not require a fee at all.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking of one particular example where it's exactly like you described. There's literally no more room on the property, and we allowed them to have less parking. The other thing this ordinance does is it allows us to count on-street parking adjacent to a building. In the past, we've never counted that because the ordinance specifically says you have to provide off-street parking for your business. This allows us to count those, if they're on-street parking spaces in front of that business. So we've built in some flexibility, I think, that addresses those circumstances that you're suggesting.
I'm just going to repeat it again. I want to make sure that a building that's landlocked has more than 1 year, if it's over 1 year, that we make sure we grandfather and don't create a problem for that building getting leased and or sold due to that.
John, I guess if we're going to do that, if we're going to change the year policy, then what we'll need to do is bring back as it pertains to the broader scope, as it applies to any business that's open. So we'll need to bring that as a general discussion based on that whole philosophy.
And if that's outside this parameter, then I'll take Lane's motion. Unless you have a further comment on this.
No, I don't have any further comment. I was trying to look for that in this draft here, but I'll make the motion to accept with the possible amendment designating limiting to the emergency fire lanes, and also to clarify if it is a building vacant, that it will be limited to.
That's not part of this ordinance. That portion of it is not.
Lane, what we'll do is take the first part of it, then what we're going to do, have them bring back at next council meeting that addition that you were just talking about, so we can address it in a bigger, broader
Very
conversation.
Good. Then I'll make the motion for the possible amendment as is.
Okay, thank you, Lane. Is there a second? I'll second it. With that, do we have public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Two. All opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, let me, if you're in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Tommy, I can't see you over there.
No, my hand is
Okay.
not up.
So with 3 in favor of those opposed, say, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. So motion does not pass. All right, so at this point, are we leaving the current draft in this? Is that what it says?
There can be a different motion made if somebody wants to make a different motion.
And what would that motion be?
You could do it, you can make a motion to approve the current draft without the amendment that's proposed. I mean, if you have a different amendment you'd like to make, you can propose a different amendment.
Let's clarify something here. Are we amending the timeline? Are we amending?
No.
Are we only amending
We're only amending that
the
possible.
the fire lane issue?
Correct.
So define designated fire. I've got one parking lot that I frequent the business a lot. And I don't know how they would have a designated fire lane.
Not all businesses do. That's really when we're reviewing plans for a new development. If they're, a small business, for example, and they're accessible from the street, if the fire truck could just pull up in the street and do whatever they need to do, then they may not need a fire lane on the site. A bigger site, like a Walmart, for example, when they bring in their site plan, they have to designate, but since they're so far back from the road typically, they have to designate a fire lane where you can't have parking, it has to be sufficient width, et cetera, and you often see those striped with red lines on either side. That's the designated fire lane.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Do we need to do we need to define designated fire lanes when necessary versus when not necessary, to Tommy's point? Meaning, does this make it people believe that everybody has to have a designated fire lane?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I would read this to say if there's a designated fire lane on a site, then it must meet this standard.
Okay. Does that clarify it, Tommy?
Yes.
All right, so do I have a new motion to accept this with that amendment?
We can't make the same motion twice.
So we got to do something different. Who has a motion they'd like to make?
I'll make a motion to accept the current draft.
Second that motion.
Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor of accepting the current draft, raise your hand. 3, 4. Those opposed, raise your right hand. 4 against, 3, 4. So that's not going to work either. So
We just eliminated the whole ordinance.
So what we'll do now is make some adjustments to what that possible amendment reads to try to get the votes supported on this item. So
I might make a suggestion that I guess I'm not clear what the concern necessarily is, but we could leave this provision out, that one sentence out of the entire ordinance if that's the concern, and either bring this back later or not.
are you suggesting that where the current draft, where it says off-street parking, et cetera, we could eliminate that?
Right. One option would be to not have any standard for passability and drivability of parking lots, and we just keep our current standard, which is you build it right when you build it, but then if it deteriorates, we don't care.
Okay, I'll make that motion. Do I have a second? Oh, wait, Tom.
I like that. So, John, how does this apply to municipalities and nonprofits and churches and people like that have big parking lots that people, frequent a lot? So how would it apply to, say, the Stock Show, Shannon Hospital, to the community hospital, their parking lots?
I think with the current draft here, that would mean that all of those parking lots would also have to be passable and drivable. Again, like we talked last time, that doesn't mean if there are a couple of potholes. It means if it's deteriorated so much that it's you can't drive on it safely. Is really the standard.
Okay, so could this be all of the parking lot or just certain areas? Could somebody abandon part of their parking lot, is what I'm saying? I mean, could a nonprofit say, I'm not even gonna worry about that corner of it because of the cost or the financial state we're in, and they abandon that and we have no recourse to that at all?
They could, unless that's required parking. So each business or nonprofit or apartment building has to have, under this ordinance, has to have a certain minimum number of parking spaces. They could not abandon those. But yeah, if they wanted to block off a section that was parking lot and say, we're not going to use that as a parking lot anymore, and then that would basically exempt them from this. I think we would want to see something, some physical barrier that would prevent people from parking on it.
They could abandon it from use and just not maintain it. I mean,
That's
they
where I'm
wouldn't have to
going.
barricade it off. They could just not maintain it and abandon it in that sort of way, and we don't do anything.
Again, in many cases, I know my insurance company comes and looks at my properties every year when the insurance premium or policy is extended. It has to be reapproved. They come and inspect the property, and an insurance company is going to have an issue with a very deteriorated parking lot because of the liability. And so in some cases, you have to accept the fact that personal property liability is, people are going to have to take care of it, and if they don't, they have risks, and they got to have that insured, correct? I mean, you're my expert.
There's
Well,
no
because
obligation.
I don't think that's correct, Mayor, because there's one business that I frequent a lot. Their parking lot is like a war zone in there. And it's a private business. I don't know who owns the parking lot, but they don't maintain it, and they don't appear to have any interest in maintaining it. And it would be a safety hazard for our public safety people to go on this parking lot. I don't know how some of their equipment could navigate the parking lot. So.
You're not talking about Bell Street, are you?
No.
Just checking.
So, I think we need some standards to, assure. Now, I don't know if this would compel this business. I don't know, but, I somehow think we got sidetracked on the time frame, and I'm not sure where we're headed. John,
The time frame is totally separate now. It's not part of this
okay,
conversation
all
at all.
right, John, go back for this slow-minded me and talk about why this came to us to begin with.
And remind everybody, we don't have anything in place right now, right? This is totally new. There's nothing out there currently.
Basically, what it came to us is similar to Councilwoman DeWitt mentioning. We receive complaints, just like you just said, about parking lots, and they call us and say, can't you do anything? This parking lot, I can't even drive on it. And so because of those concerns, we included this in the original draft. As we sent this through, it went to the Development Task Force a couple of times, at Planning Commission. Honestly, this concern really didn't get raised too much. This was talked a little bit, especially at the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission reworded it to this language here because they thought it was a little overly broad in the original draft that we had proposed. And so they backed off a little bit to get to this draft. But that's really what raised it in the first place, is that concern of just really bad parking lots out there.
So what do we do? Okay, Council, what do we do about the really bad parking? Do we just not care, period? And if the parking lot is the only one that our public, this has no on-street. They couldn't fight a fire. They couldn't get an ambulance up to this, and there's more than one business in there. They couldn't get an emergency vehicle up on this parking lot. Couldn't do it from the street because this building is set back far enough. It's 150 to 100 feet away from any public street. So how do we ensure that our public safety folks can get up on this parking lot safely? I don't think they can right now, but that's neither here nor there.
Daniel,
how do we deal with that?
Daniel has a
If I may
comment.
suggest something here, I know that we heard a little while ago that If a citizen has a complaint about a parking lot, they can definitely voice a complaint to the owner of that property and just let them know, hey, if you can't do something to keep me safe, I can't do business here any longer. That would be the responsibility of that business owner. As far as a possible amendment, I would say be very specific. Those businesses that are required to have a designated fire lane the fire lane shall be passable and drivable for emergency vehicles, and that takes care of that. So that takes care of any ambiguity in the possible amendment. You're saying those that are required to have the fire lane would have to actually have it passable and drivable. That's
Makes sense.
my suggestion.
So the verbiage would be businesses that are required to have fire lanes those fire lanes shall be passable and drivable for emergency vehicles.
So,
yes, Billy?
Question. So does that mean that our city staff is going to have to go out and inspect every parking lot to see whether or not they're required to have an emergency lane? I mean, who's to say?
No, that's already, when you submit a site plan for a new development, when you're
I'm
building
talking about
a new
existing
building,
businesses.
No, if businesses that have a required fire lane, we already know whether or not they have a required fire lane.
Oh, okay.
And
All
if
right.
they're old enough that they didn't have to have one at the time, then they still don't have one. Even if brand new, they would need one. They're basically grandfathered from that in any case.
I just want to make sure we don't become so heavy-handed as a city that everything that every little citizen comes up and brings up requires some sort of legal ordinance. I mean, we can't regulate every single thing that happens in life.
We're not going to tap into private property rights.
We can't, yeah.
Well, and I
it's
think
about private property rights. And
the
Tom?
objections that we've got, that we all received, were about, I have a parking lot and I have a business. I don't think it's within the city's, domain to come in and say, you need to fix that hole or that. And I mean, I get that. I don't think we should ever be able to
Agreed.
impose that upon anybody. But I do think, as Anthony kind of put up here, will require a fire lane and accessibility. And if you can get through there, then we're okay. But I don't think we have to specify the quality of it beyond the fact that it's available for an emergency vehicle to pass.
All right, so what I would like to do is make a motion for a possible amendment on this. It says required fire lanes within all parking areas shall be passable and drivable for emergency vehicles.
Second.
And a second by Lane. Do we have public comment? No public comment. All of those in favor, raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Victory. Passes 7-0. Thank you, Daniel, for
You're
that
welcome.
language. We were getting tangled up there a bit. Okay. All right.
Government at its finest.
Can we go home, Mayor?
Sorry.
Can we go to your parking lot?
Move to adjourn.
Highlight on San Angelo Live.
That was
Where is
tough
that
work.
parking lot?
Okay, we are going to move on to item C then, update on animal services no-kill initiative. And today we have Morgan Chadwigan here to present that to us, and we're going to ask you to speak loud and slow.
Yes, ma'am. I'm prepared to do that. Thank you. It's been about a year since I was before y'all, November 2017 to be exact, so a little over a year, to talk about the activity at the animal shelter. We did have a recent change in our initiative and celebrated the 3rd anniversary of the No Kill Initiative in March 2019, where we achieved our highest ever monthly live release rate of 78%. Along that time frame as well, we went to the Animal Shelter Advisory Committee in April to further define what no kill means. And so what we've proceeded with and are ready to speak to you about today is the San Angelo Pets Alive initiative to really define what no-kill is, that we've adopted this specific model. It has 12 tenets that it sets forth that are things you need to address. It's a tried and true program that's used nationwide. It is very data-driven, which is something we're hungry for. I think that so far we've been really successful at the things that are intuitive, the things that are common sense. I'm not saying that they're easy or cheap, but we've done a lot of the things that just made sense go in, do these things, we've had a tremendous increase in our live release rate. But now we need to do the things that are innovative, the things that maybe don't make sense, but when you see the data, when you see the case studies of other communities that are doing this really well, then we have to consider them for our community as well. One thing I want to point out about Pets Alive is that it's very flexible. And there's a tremendous amount of guidance out there. For example, there's one of these items we're going to talk about in just a moment where we're actually applying for a fellowship to go to a community that is doing this correctly, to have a 5-day in-depth seminar where we walk alongside them, ask specific questions about our community. So one, there's a lot of guidance, there's a lot of training, there's a lot of protocols that they're willing to share easily. And then there's a lot of flexibility. So if we see things in Pets Alive that just don't make sense for our community, like, hey, that's very Austin, Texas, it's not very San Angelo, Texas. They're like, take it and leave it. You know, the things that make sense for you, adopt them, adapt them, make them work for you. The things that don't make sense to you, skip them, maybe come back later. Maybe that's not part of your story. But that's what I find really valuable because there's not a lot of uniformity out there. Anthony, I'm having trouble. There we go. Thank you. So I'm going to go through
Doesn't want to stay.
He's just playing with you.
I'm vamping, right? Okay. So I have they're the 12 tenets. Some of them I'm going to hit pretty quickly.
Slowly but quickly.
I'm going to, right. Well, and some of them we'll spend a little more time and we'll get a little more in depth. But certainly let me know what items you're hungry for more information on. The first category of tenets that I'm going to speak through are ones that we need to start. Things that we're not doing right now or things that we're not doing well, okay? So the first before you is sheltered community cats. This is a new way to do trap, neuter, release. This is a new thing about shelter, neuter, release. This is about, I think that a lot of the hindrance in the past has been that it's insurmountable, right? How many feral cats do we have in this community? It's a lot, and it's a financial investment, and it's really good that we already have the community cat ordinance in place. We are already... we have a lot of tools there already. It's just a matter of funding and matching funding with them. Perfect. There we go.
Do you want to tell us what that community cat ordinance is?
Sure. So the community cat ordinance is something that the council approved in 2015. It put a burden on colony caregivers. It was brought to you by Bob Solis, but largely drafted by community members. So nonprofits in the area said this is something that's working well at Angelo State University, if any of you recall, and then let's scale it to be the rest of the city. And it required pets to be spayed, neutered, cats in a colony to be spayed, neutered, to be rabies vaccinated, and to be registered with an agency of record. It was optional to also microchip, offer annual vaccines. So optional items and required items set forth in that community cat ordinance. What it didn't do was fund anything or speak to community cats that are not part of a colony, which is what we see a lot of. So to start small, to take our first baby step and delve into this, is to talk about those community cats, which Pets Alive identifies domestic, feral, unowned. If it is an unowned cat, it is a community cat. Okay, so cats that are used to living outside, used to finding their own food resource, this is what they're speaking to. So our first baby step into this is to work on funding to simply speak to spaying and neutering and rabies vaccinating those community cats that come into our facility and then releasing them right back where they came from. There's a lot of science behind the movement and behavior of feral cats. If you simply euthanize, you'll actually grow the population. But if you take a big tomcat, put him right back where he is, he will keep other cats at bay. There's a nature about scarcity and smaller litters and fewer cats occurring. So that is what we're doing here. It would be the single best impact to our live release rate. It's simply a matter of funding. I was able to partner and get funding through the end of fiscal year 19, so effective immediately through September 30th. I do have funding for the projected number of community cats coming into our shelter the rest of the year. So this is something we're starting right now, but it's not sustainable. I got a one-time funding source of about $20,000 to invest in this program. I do want to point out what that means for our live release rate. I think there are a lot of reasons to do some of these programs, some of them because they're the right thing to do, some of them because it's not our fault, but it's a problem in our community, and some of them because it increases the live release rate. I would say sheltered community cats hits all of those. Not only is it the right thing to do, not only is it our fault, these are domestic cats whose grandparents were kicked out, they reverted to their natural state, they look, appearance-wise like domestic cats. So if the actual live release rate that we've achieved month by month is here in this blue line, if I had the funding and had launched shelter neuter release October 1st, we would have been at this green line. So instead of achieving at the average of a 61% live release rate so far, we would be closer to 75%. And particularly in March, which was our highest ever, we would be at 86%. So this has the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak, as far as speaking to the number of live releases that we can have on an annualized basis.
Right now, you're saying you have funding that will go through the end of September, but there won't be funding in budget 2020?
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
So Morgan, does that give you enough time to see what the trends might be in that short time frame?
Right. We're kind of watching it like a pilot program. We are applying for private funding as well as grant funding. And we, again, have applied for this. This is one where we've applied for a fellowship to go to a community that's doing it well, so that we're going to start at it. We're going to do as much good as we can do. But how can we also be really smart about it? So, yes, I think a 5-month pilot program will let us gather some data to know how to be smart about it going forward in future funding cycles. Okay. And to be clear, this is not something we've requested to be added to our fiscal year 20 budget through the general fund, because we have some really promising leads on private funding. I just haven't heard a yes or no on those yet. So we'll continue seeking those. Okay, the next item that we need to start doing better at, we certainly have a return to owner policy. We talked about it earlier with the emergency that we had about how to redeem your own pet from the shelter. But Pets Alive really speaks to progressive return to owner policies. So this is something we're still working through. It's really impactful that the council approved in, I believe, 2014 that all pets, so the state requires all pets be registered. The San Angelo City Council defined that as a microchip requirement. And so I think that that's really valuable. We're also cross-posting found pets, so nobody goes to the city website when their pet is missing. There's a lot of confusion out there about where animals go. So we're cross-posting them in social media. We're cross-posting them on a local lost and found website. That is already happening. We've also advanced that during this natural disaster to be on the Nextdoor app, for example. So we're looking for those ways. That's really time involved for my staff, so we're looking for some smarter ways to share that, or that's a great opportunity for volunteer-based. But what the really biggest thing hindering owner redemptions is the fee schedule we have in place. So we want to bring that back to you. I know that you've reviewed a tremendous amount of fees in the last month, but we weren't ready in our Pets Alive journey to really speak to this intelligently about what works. I still have a lot of questions, and I have those messages into folks that I think are doing it really well to speak to what their fee schedule is. And what I'm finding is, if I could, let's bring that back in a further meeting to review the fee schedule for owner redemptions, so we can speak to how to do that proactively.
Before you get off that slide, Morgan, I have one question here. You get a report from a citizen that you've got a dog loose, and you go out and you pick it up. It's microchipped. You know exactly where that particular owner is. You take it back to them. How many times do you take it back before there is some type of liability from the owner standpoint? Because what I see is the same dogs are running loose in the same neighborhoods on a regular basis. So citizens get tired of calling animal control, because all animal control is doing is reading the chip and taking it back to the owner. The owner then, because they're not responsible to keep that particular pet somewhere's inside or in a fenced yard, continues to let that particular dog loose and run. So what mechanism do we have in place that allows that owner then to feel some liability to ensure that they're gonna keep that pet off the street?
Sure. And if I could back up, I do regret to report that almost never do we return a pet to the field as we pick it up. It almost certainly comes into the shelter. And that's due to people working 8 to 5 jobs. We call, we get the microchip information, if it's current, if it's registered, right? Because although the council set the requirement that it be a microchip, they didn't set the requirement that it be our microchip. So I have a pet that was adopted in Marion County, Florida. Came in on Sunday. So we contact, there's no owner registered, so that agency doesn't enter the owner information. We ask that agency, who did you issue that microchip to? We don't know, it was 5 years ago, we don't have records. So that pet and many pets like it are unable to be reunited in the field because the data that's out there is old. Or disconnected phone numbers, or I gave that pet away last year, I don't have it anymore, I don't know the new owner's information. So almost never are we returning the animal in the field to its property, because we have to have a responsible property owner there. So when a citizen comes in, if our staff saw the animal at large, they are subject to a citation for dog at large. In the past, you'll recall that we were also writing citations at that time for not being current on rabies, not having, if a pet didn't have a microchip, and not being spayed neutered. We're giving citizens a grace period on that and having a tremendous amount of success on that. And so as far as repeat offenders, the biggest detriment to those citizens to encourage them to do better is the citation that they receive through the municipal court for the dog being at large.
Just to remind everybody, the reason we have an animal shelter is why? Irresponsible owners.
Right. And that's something Pets Alive says again and again, is it's not your fault, but it is your problem. And so how do we come alongside folks, encourage responsible pet practices? The microchipping is a huge part of that. Does that answer your question, sir? Okay. And just our return to owners have been increasing over time. For fiscal year 18, it was about 12% of our total outcomes were returned to owners. We would think closer to 20% would be appropriate, and we are working through that. As I mentioned, the fees are the biggest thing to study. The last item that I show as need to address, haven't really tackled, is appropriate capacity for large adult dogs. So it is not, as you look at other facilities across the state, they were all built like mine. It is not intended to hold large dogs for any amount of time, and those are the animals that I hold for the longest periods. The adoption for little dogs is really great. The opportunities for transport to other facilities is really great, but for large adult dogs, we do need to address that. It is helpful that Concho Valley Paws is making progress on their adoption center next door. What they're building will be very good for large dogs, but there are some facility improvements necessary for my facility. There is an opportunity later this meeting to talk about partially funding what I call my big dog barn, and it would be a separate structure with large kennels inside for my long stay dogs that I know are healthy. They would also have access to their own private yard, so it would be an in and out situation. They call it a guillotine door. I think that's a little morbid, but it's like a doggy door that I can close or not close. So dogs can go outside, they can be in the sun, they can come inside, they can sleep on their bed. They have access to relieve themselves, outside and live and feed inside. And so it is something that I'm in the very early stages of planning for, and again, later today will be an opportunity to partially fund that. But that is something that Pets Alive cites as very important. So this next group of tenets are things that we are doing well. Things that Pets Alive sets forth as tenets that we were already doing or recently started doing, okay? The first is disease prevention. They're very big on vaccinating on intake. That's something our shelter has always done. And so I'm glad to have that reaffirmed that we continue to do it because it is quite expensive. The current contract with Concho Valley Paws does provide for basic and emergency medical care for animals that are under our care. There's always room for improved cleaning protocols, and we do have a visitor from Maddie's Fund who's in the Pets Alive coalition. They're actually coming and sending professionals to our staff shelter later this month to shadow us, follow us, and then give any recommendations for improvements. The next thing I would say we're doing well is intake diversion. Now, this is something for owners surrendering their pets. This is something that we've talked about. Even when I was in private rescue, I spoke to city management about it many years ago, and Pets Alive does cite that it's something that's important. So this is not for stray pets. This is not intended to prevent people from coming into the shelter, but it is where by appointment, citizens wishing to own or surrender their own pets would come in for a counseling session with Contra Valley Paws. At that time, they would be offered support services. There are a couple items that would reference that you have an immediate, don't go through a process, absolutely surrender that pet immediately. And those items are if you've suffered a natural disaster, as we recently did, or if the pet is aggressive to a human in your home. That is something we would say, yes, bring me your pet right now. There are other items where we offer support services. I think
Could you stop 1 minute? I think Lucy had a question.
I just have a question. I know you said something about the stray cats, but say, for instance, I had a constituent that had a cat that had kittens, and they weren't his, and I had suggested that he go to the animal shelter. Does he have to pay to leave those?
Not for stray animals.
Okay.
If you are the owner, which you're defined as the owner if you've been caring for that pet more than 3 days. Now, we do offer a little. That is our policy. So we do offer a little grace, like if it's a 3-day weekend and this cat showed up on Friday, so you fed her, then we were closed Monday, then we would offer a little grace there. But what we often find out in the conversation is with the citizen is, oh yeah, I've been feeding them for 2 weeks. Well, then we would ask for you to go through this process because bringing kittens into the shelter is almost increases their fatality, and we want to prevent that. So if you have been caring for them for 2 weeks, can we come alongside you? Can you foster them, bring them into the adoption system, but not physically bring them into the shelter, whereby we offer vetting, we offer food, we offer spay-neuter, and all our resources for adoption, and within a couple weeks more, that pet is rehomed and is never exposed to the disease that happens in the shelter. So to speak to intake diversion, for fiscal year 17, 43% of our animals coming in were because they were surrendered by their owners. Going into fiscal year 18, only 25% were such animals.
Why is that big difference?
Because although the Animal Shelter Advisory Committee just approved managed intake as a formal policy in April of 2019, we started conversations at the counter in 2018 with staff. So my staff would say, the shelter's full, can we offer you support services? I think there's a misnomer that folks that are wishing to own or surrender their pet are
Financially, is it a financial issue?
I think some folks are quick to assume that they're making a poor choice. But what we're finding is the vast majority of people wishing to own or surrender their pets, well, the primary breadwinner, their husband lost their job, or they're moving, or something like that, or they're having behavioral issues. Well, you have 2 dogs and they're both unaltered males. Can Paws offer you a voucher to get your pet spayed neutered? Or can we offer you to our pantry, we have kitty litter. Will that get you by so you can hold on to your cat for a while longer? Can we offer you dog food? And so within that time frame, your spouse gets their dog job back, or perhaps he hasn't yet, so you check back in with us. We do another influx of donations and so that's through Contra Valley Paws resources to be able to show, can I come alongside you? Can we be a partner? Because one thing that Pets Alive speaks to is that citizens who love pets are going to have pets. So if you find a citizen that has a dog and it's on the chain 24/7, and maybe it's not current on its rabies vaccine, those are things where we would say, red flag, these are violations. But Pets Alive says, if you seize that animal or encourage them to give up that animal, next month they're just going to have another dog. So instead, come alongside them and say, can we offer you support services? Can we offer you things to keep that pet in your home? So that's why that public-private partnership is really valuable, because as a city, I can't offer them that much. But as Contra Valley Paws, they can solicit donations to specifically speak to these items. And so that's kind of a different school of thought to say, how can I keep this pet in your home instead of every year for the next 10 years I take a pet in from your home? Instead, keep this one pet in your home for 10 years. Okay, another thing that we're doing really well is the immediate make ready. So in manufacturing, you would say, how do we very quickly get these animals where they need to go? So one thing we do is we make all intake, I said strays, but all intake is available online immediately. So if an animal services officer picks up a dog on a Saturday night, when he enters that in, it's in there. So over Easter weekend, we had a Rottweiler come in and maybe 5 pit bulls. So a citizen came in and said, I saw, it didn't have a picture, it didn't have a description, but it said Rottweiler, and I'm missing a Rottweiler and a pit bull. Well, great, we had a parade of pit bulls that I brought forward until we found their pit bull. So they were able to identify and know that their pet was there before we even opened Monday morning, so that they could hustle, get in, get those pets back, and right at 10 a.m. when we opened to the public, they were there getting their pets back. So that is one thing we do. Also, all in-processing happens within 1 business day. So all animals get a full description of their details, they're photographed, they're named, because the path is often adoption for these pets, and we identify an outcome path. So if I have a pet come in and it is not microchipped, and it is, but it's clearly well-fed, been bathed recently, maybe been to the groomer, I say, this pet's owned. And so I may take extra paths to make sure that this pet is redeemed to its owner. We already have, I think, a really robust opportunity to connect pets back with their owners, but we would go the extra mile. Maybe I call a few groomers. Can I text you pictures of this dog? Somebody knows this dog. And so we can say, this is an owned pet, we've got to get this pet back with its owners. Or this pet is a great candidate for transport. We have some rescue partners that take specific kinds of pets. We have a rescue partner that takes nothing but puppies, and we are very appreciative of them. And so we may have a litter of puppies come in and say, hey, when they're off their 3-day stray hold, let's see if we can get a transport to this facility out of state, because they can take them, they can keep them healthy. So we would honor the 3-day stray hold always, but we want to start working on those things ahead of time to increase the turnaround of how long that pet's actually in our shelter. And the last thing I would identify that we're already doing well is related to euthanasia list scrutiny and sharing. One of the things I instituted is that before any pet's euthanized at our facility, it takes a 4-person sign-off to approve that. And that's 2 representatives from Contra Valley Paws and 2 representatives from city staff. And so other Pets Alive communities do it different ways, but I'm really comfortable. I found a lot of value in that. I think that it offers a lot of really good conversation about what resources paws have, and there's no assumptions made. For example, if I see a pet and it has a tremendous amount of medical issues, we would say, look, this animal's suffering, we don't think that it's adoptable, but paws may say, oh no, I have money for treatment, let's at least see a vet, let's see what we can do. And I've seen pets that have been adopted after recovery that we certainly as a city, as a government entity, did not have the funds to invest in. And the last few items that are tenets of Pets Alive that are really led by our partner Contra Valley Paws, I did want to list them as Pets Alive, but I would let Paws speak to them in their own venues, as progressive adoption policies, population-based foster programs, large-scale transport programs, and targeted safety net programs. So those are things that I also think we're doing well. They're just not city-led, so I am not reporting on those today, but still important components of the Pets Alive initiative. So I wanted to have that opportunity to come back to you. I know that individually some of y'all reach out, but I don't think we've had a comprehensive conversation of this shift that we've made. It is still furthering the no-kill initiative. It is still trying to get to 90%, but it is a very different way of doing business.
Do I have further questions from council or comments for Morgan? Thank you, very good, and I'm glad to see the progress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work, Morgan.
We will move into item D, public hearing and first reading of utility fee ordinances intended to amend conservation discounts under Chapter 11 Utilities, Article 11.02, Water and Sewer Systems, Section 11.02.31 Rates, and add senior assistant rates to Appendix A Fee Schedule, Article A8, Utility-Related Fees. Allison, you're on.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. At the previous City Council meeting, we brought to you the proposal for our customer programs related to the utility. As you're aware, the current customer program that we offer is the conservation discounts. We've talked several times now about the issues related to the discounts, but I'll be happy to go over any specific questions you all have. At the last council meeting, we talked about the 3 proposed programs, 2 of them being financial assistance programs and 1 being a true conservation program. What I have for you today is the changes that are required by the ordinance to start the implementation of these 3 programs. The only thing that has to be done is the first is to remove the language discussing the discounts, which is this section down here. And the other one was just to clean up our Section A and be more in line with our current billing practices. The next item is to add this statement here below the residential rates. So this would be in regards to the senior assistance program, that they get that 50% reduction in fees in this first tier. The other programs to be implemented don't require ordinance amendments. We'll be bringing MOUs or agreements with Concho Valley Community Action Agency at the next meeting following the second reading of these changes, which will be basically the final touches for the 2 financial assistance programs. And regarding the conservation program of the showerhead and aerator, recently we've put those products out for bid to purchase about 3,000 of those. That dollar amount reaches thresholds that we've got to advertise and get written quotes on those. And so we'd be bringing those back or purchasing those items and all of this to be implemented hopefully at the beginning of July. The financial assistance programs for sure by July 1. We may not have the actual shower heads and aerators by July 1, but shortly thereafter.
Mayor?
Yes, Billy.
Could I ask a question? Would you remind me, Allison, of the requirements for senior assistance?
Yes, you are required to be 65 years or older. You have to meet the 150% federal poverty guideline. And then you would, to be vetted for that program, you would go to the Concho Valley Community Action Agency. They would check your requirements and then let us know to our billing staff, and we would make that adjustment and put them in that category that gives them 50% off in this first tier. And then they would be billed such monthly for up to 2 years. And at the 2-year mark, they would have to re-enroll.
Lucy, you had a question?
Oh, my question is, you said that they would have to go to the Concho Valley Community Agency to apply for this?
Yes.
And where is that located?
The basement of the Cactus Hotel, I believe.
Yes, I was about to say. They can also, they do not have to show up in person. If they call the action agency, they can, I think they have online forms, but they also can mail the individual forms. So they do, currently with the programs they have in place today, the individual does not have to come in person to their facility. They have other means of enrolling customers in different programs.
And you said it starts July 1st, or do they?
Yes.
Can they start now, or is that when the paperwork, I mean, they have to start?
Yes, we would start vetting customers July 1.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Do I have questions or comments from any council members?
I have another
Yes, Billy.
question, and this is more of a general question, Allison. When the conservation program started, I think you shared with us that the anticipated expense for that was going to be about $150,000 annually. And as of what year, it was over $400,000.
This year?
Yes, this past year, it was over
2018, it was
400,000.
450,000. Right, exactly. So Alice, because I've gotten a couple of calls from seniors who are saying, I don't meet the poverty guidelines or anything, but I think I need to, I work to conserve. I think I need to keep the discount. And I just want to make sure that our citizens understand how much more it is costing us, how much greater the expense is under that we did not anticipate. And also, the $450,000, where is that coming from, and how could we be using that money if we weren't applying it to these conservation methods?
Okay, so with the start, yes, it was supposed to not exceed 150,000. I believe it exceeded that. It was implemented in 2006, and I think about 3 years later, it had already exceeded that amount. What we can't measure with the expenditures or those rebates, discounts that we're giving back to customers is those that are actually receiving those discounts based on their conservation methods or their desire to conserve water. So we have vacant homes that are receiving this discount. We've kind of gone through the issues, but we have no way to measure or to vet the customer to qualify them to give them this discount. And so what we want is measurable programs such as the shower head and aerator. So maybe the customers that don't apply or aren't eligible for the financial assistance, they could come get a shower head and look at saving those 14,000 gallons a year. And so that knocks their maybe one tier off of their bill. And so then they're still receiving a lower rate. Or getting down into the lower usage that are a cheaper per 1,000 gallon.
Because it is rate-based off of usage, so if you continue, you reduce it self-motivated.
Yes, so if they can stay in these two tiers here where the rates are lower, maybe that is a way that they can manage their bill or to try to receive some sort of discount.
Thank you.
Or it wouldn't be a discount, but it would just be a lower bill.
Do I have further questions from council? Michael, you had a comment you wanted to make?
The participation with the Community Action Agency may expose these clients to other assistance programs that they might be eligible for. So it might be a net gain for them to participate because that group assists with other utilities. They have other utility assistance programs that they administer.
Like electricity?
Yes,
et cetera?
ma'am.
Yes. Okay, so do we need a motion on this today? Do I have someone who would like to make a motion?
Move approval, Mayor.
A second.
And a second by Lucy. Do we have public comment? With no public comment, we will take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
None opposed. Motion passes 7-0. We will move on to item E, discussion and direction for possible project use of the Lake Nasworthy Trust Fund. And Daniel, you're on for this one.
Okay. Mayor, council members, this item is on here because we've had some discussions. We've been approached by citizens, those that
Could you talk into the
Sure,
microphone,
absolutely.
please?
We have been approached. We have been approached by the citizens, not just Lake Nasworthy's Homeowners Association, but others as well that have expressed interest in improvements out there at Lake Nasworthy. And on our end, we also know that we want to make our improvements as it comes to the sewer project that we discussed a couple of meetings ago. We heard those numbers, the initial numbers from the study that came out to about $32 million. But we also know that in order for us to continue our growth as far as economic development, one of our priorities is the Lake Nasworthy, especially the airport. In order for us to develop that, we have to ensure that we have the proper infrastructure in there. Right now, we're very lacking in our sewer infrastructure. In order for us to have more development, and that's something that's really hindered us in the past when we've had actually, for example, one of the restaurants that actually wanted to go out there and develop in that area, and they just couldn't because we just didn't have the capacity for that sewer. So that's something that's of primary importance for us. Other areas, items that have been discussed with us pertain to improving.
Daniel, you want to also mention, and Tommy has brought it up several times, people right now who have closed their businesses because of a backlog of sewer or a smell, and the smell was so bad. So it's not only about future development, it's also about making sure that the current sewer system for our customers is providing the correct sewer system.
And I think to further expand that, Mayor, the businesses that have been directly affected by that really aren't that close to the lake, which is odd. It's because it's just sitting there. It's not moving because we don't have the ability to move it because we don't have the proper infrastructure. So it's not just airport, Lake Nasworthy. It's affecting others because of lack of capacity in the system.
Correct. Sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
No problem, Aaron. That's a very good point, and that's very true. On our end, again, it is to address current issues, and I should have expressed that as well, but also future issues when it comes to developing that area. And of course, as we know, with economic development, the more that we grow as far as our property values, new businesses coming in, it actually gives our citizens some relief when they go to pay their property taxes as well. So we're looking for any way that we possibly can to really improve upon our economic development, but also make improvements out there at the Lake Nasworthy. Some of the areas that have been brought to us that for discussion, was to make improvements to the boat ramps. There's some concerns out there that some of those boat ramps have been there for a while, no improvements have been made, and really make improvements to boat ramps that for some reason or other there's not any grants money that's available. So they would like to see perhaps Master-worthy trust fund money spent for that. Also, another item that came up, and I have one gentleman in particular that's always on me every single time we see him, is when are you going to fix that the T dock there next to the nature center? He loves to fish out there. A lot of his friends like to fish out there, but that's another one that the Lake Nasworthy Homeowners Group actually brought up as well. The other one pertains to shoreline protection and restoration of the islands up there. We've had a lot of reed growth out there. Regardless, we know that we definitely want to do something moving forward to address economic development, but also to make some improvements out there at Lake Nasworthy. We know that our Nasworthy Trust Fund has grown to a little over $15 million right now. We would like to look at some of those projects in the future, but also to address our infrastructure improvement. And if we can use some of those monies, that'll definitely make it a lot easier to fund the remainder of the project, the $32 million. But the reason we bring it to you is because we'd like to get some guidance from you to see what we do moving forward.
You know what I'd like to start off with, and I don't know whether Michael, Dana, Teresa want to do what I'm going to ask you to do, or whether you want me to stumble through it. But what we want to do is make sure people understand why Lake Nasworthy Fund exists, what it is, how it came about, because many people assume that incorrectly that Lake Nasworthy Trust Fund is a fund for Lake Nasworthy homeowners. That is what it is not. It is a trust fund that was created by the city because the citizens of San Angelo helped purchase that property. And so it's owned by the citizens of San Angelo, not the Lake Nasworthy homeowners, and we need to be very clear on that subject. As it relates to how we're about $15.3 million in that fund, which is sitting there, we believe strongly that the use of those funds, instead of just sitting there, can help us take care of some of the issues that exist. Those additional leases, properties that we still own, as they're sold, will replenish some of that funds, because those funds are also used for the operations and maintenance of Lake Nasworthy. So we can't deplete the fund. We must continue to build up, to put money back into that fund. But I believe strongly that what we need to do today is to use those funds to help make the improvements from the lake itself, which is used by citizens in this city, all citizens in this city, and that we also need to address the sewer issues. So that was a small sort of explanation. Teresa or Michael, could you add to that so I don't simplify it or mispresent it?
No, I think you've covered the central points. The only other part is this organization does not exist to build large fund balances. We should build fund balances which allow stability of services that we provide. But unlike a for-profit organization, we're not here for financial enrichment. Those large fund balances are there because we collected them somehow, and they should be used to the extent that they're available. They should be used to provide the services to the taxpayers that paid those amounts. So,
Teresa, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the only thing I want to add is kind of restate what you've already said, is that the fund was created through a charter election. And the language in the charter itself says that no portion of the principal of the fund shall be expended for any purpose unless authorized by a majority vote of qualified participating voters of the city of San Angelo in an election for that purpose. So because it was created through a charter election, if we want to change the purpose or authorize some of these projects, we would do that again through a charter election addressing that particular section, which I think is going to be another item on our agenda today.
All right. So at this point, do we need to make a motion to have a charter election, or what motion do we need to make or do on this particular item E?
Nothing right now, Mayor. We're really looking for guidance, direction from the City Council, specifically what it is that you would like for us to look at. Again, I've mentioned what's been submitted to me by the Homeowners Association, and that actually comes out to what they guesstimated at $5 million. You know, the City Council could say, let's take a look at how we can use $5 million towards projects there at the lake. and then the remainder look at it perhaps for the sewer project. But that's the kind of direction we need from the city council at this point, so that we know moving forward what we need to be doing.
Well, I think what you just stated is something that I support, and that is taking a look at the projects that have been put forward. Dollar amounts have yet to be determined on those projects, so we may or may not be able to do all of those projects. The dollars will limit that. My suggestion, and you can criticize it or change it, but is to ask that we sort of take a look at $5 million for Lake Nasworthy improvements and perhaps $5 million for some sewer improvements, still leaving over $5 million in the fund. But I'm just throwing that out, and I would like Tommy to start on making some comments on that.
Sure. I guess, Daniel, at some point, staff will look at the list we have been presented to start working through the numbers if we haven't done that to see that.
We've already started that with
Okay.
through Shane Kelton, absolutely.
Okay, good. So, and at some point, we'll have a better handle on the costs associated
Yes,
with
sir.
some of those items.
And that's
out
true.
there.
And we don't necessarily, even if you decide today to say, okay, let's look at projects no more than $5 million, we can make sure that the projects that have been submitted and others that may be submitted as well, that we keep it within that $5 million range. You know, so we may be able to do the 3 plus more. We may not be able to do all 3 of them, depending on what comes back as far as the cost associated. So what we're looking from the city council is what's the ceiling on that? Is that $5 million? Is it $7 million? Is it $4 million for the projects? But even with the mayor, I do want to say that even though you threw out a $5 million number for the sewer project, it could be more than that. We know that we still have about 170 properties that we have on the books that we're actually leasing at this point. Our objective, the city council's objective in the past and even currently, is to sell those properties and get out of the leasing business. So we know that we can build that fund balance back up. You know, even if we do use the big majority of the $15 million, we know we can build that back up as well.
What I think we have to have is, because we do have to use those funds for operation and maintenance, so we need to know on an annual basis what that dollar amount is so that we know what the minimum balance in that fund must be to continue the operations and maintenance of that. So we need to have that brought back to us, and we also need to have a projection, a spreadsheet done on the existing properties that are still out there, potential dollar value, and what that might, on an annual basis, bring back into the fund. So we better know what we can do to build that fund back up. So those are projects I think the city needs to work on, so that you give the confidence to the city council in terms of those dollars and what might or may not be able to be done. Harry?
When I first had the opportunity to sit on the Investment Oversight Committee, that was one of the first comments I ever made to Michael Dane. We got to do something with that money out there. And Michael explained that it has to go back to the citizens for a vote. So I've been a proponent of this for more than 2 years, nearly 3 as a matter of fact. I would like to see exactly what the mayor just said, a list of the projects, the possibility, the cost of those things, and so that we can make some decisions that will be in the best interest of all the citizens. But I certainly think that we ought to take a portion of this and apply it to the sewer issue that we've got and see if we can't make sure that that is fixed so that we can grow the Lake Nasworthy area, whether it's businesses or additional housing or whatever that is out there. We know that the progress at the airport is never going to happen unless we have the sewer system built the way it is. We've already had to say no to 2 businesses in the last 18 months because we don't have the capacity out there. So we've got to fix that. We know that. And to Tommy's point, there are some boat ramps out there that really could use some help. And we know that we've got people from outside of the city of San Angelo that come on a regular basis to utilize Lake Nasworthy. We need to make sure that those particular facilities out there are as good as we can make them.
Tommy?
Daniel, my suggestion would be to go along with the mayor's. I would suggest, you know, as we move through the budget process, that Shane bring to us, I assume this is going to probably be a Shane item.
Will be.
The numbers to the best of his ability to give us accurate on the list of priorities that they have. And then I guess we need to further see if those are the priorities that we need to be addressing in terms of lake needs. And then I agree fully with Harry, the mayor as well. Part of this money needs to help our sewer issue out there. So I would say, as we work through that, bring that back to us, and then we can maybe put a little more meat on those bones as we move forward on this.
I think right now, what we want to do as staff is to start these discussions as well, to put it out there in the public that these are things that we're looking at. What I'm hearing right now is that we're getting support, of course, for some projects that need to be done. We just need to make sure that we shore up those numbers. But I'm also hearing that the sewer project is also a priority we should be taking a look at. So that's kind of the guidance that we're looking for. We don't necessarily need dollar numbers attached to it right now, but it's just to be able to move forward and say these are the projects that City Council deemed as a priority, and we want to move forward and start looking at them right now.
So do we now need a motion on this item and say we need, or in the next item where we talk about the charter, we bring it back as part of the charter conversation, or do we need a firm decision now that we want to do this and we want a November charter election to be inclusive of the Lake Nasworthy Trust Fund monies?
This is just a discussion,
Correct.
so just general direction is fine. Just a point of clarification. The charter spells out that the money cannot be used without an election, but it is a special election separate from a charter election.
Okay. So right now, really, it's just a direction. So I just kind of repeated what I heard a while ago, and that's that there are priorities that address the projects out there at Lake Nasworthy, but also the sewer project is another one that's a priority. So if I'm hearing that from council, we can develop the numbers and come back. But we would definitely like to be able to start talking about this. These are some of the things that we're looking at and start kind of promoting that, you know. So if that's the direction that I'm hearing, I'd like to be able to move forward with that.
Is there any opposition to that conversation? So the entire council and mayor are very supportive of moving forward on this just item and looking at using the funds for future projects. Harry?
Just a clarification from Julia. You said a special election, but can it be held at the same time as the charter election?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, with that, then I think we move on to item F, which is discussion of possible items considered for November 2019 charter election, and I should say, and special election.
Correct.
And add that verbiage to that line. So with that, Daniel, you're back on again?
Yes, ma'am. Again, what we'd like to get from the City Council is some guidance on this, since we are looking at this point at that special election. This would be an opportune time to include also the consideration for the charter changes, if there's any to be had. There's 5 items that have come up that could be addressed in this charter election. It's not in depth, but these are some of the ones that, quite frankly, have been brought up to me in the past, and I just want to make sure that I included those in there. And that's to address, first of all, the City Council as far as term of service. We know that right now, City Council in the last charter election, the changes that were made were City Council members could run for office, have 2 terms of 4 years with a limitation to those 2 terms. A question that's been brought up to me is, do we need to start taking a look at the benefits of actually doing away with the term limit and allowing a council member to continue to serve their district based on the fact that the citizens voted them back into that position, instead of limited to the 2 terms of 4 years, is actually remove that. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that. Also, the City Council, as far as vacancies, we wanted to make sure that we're pretty clear on if a City Council member left for some reason or another and have vacated their position, at what point do we call for a special election? If that council member only has less than 12 months left on their term, should we just leave it vacant at that point? If it's more than 12 months, the charter could actually specify that we have to call a special election. So we want to make sure we have clarification on that. As far as our CIP, we have a capital improvement plan. It's a 5-year plan. We review this very frequently on a yearly basis, and we're making updates to it, but it does get tedious. It does take a lot of staff time. We were looking at the opportunity to maybe do it every 2nd or 3rd year, which would suffice. It would keep it updated regardless, but it's just something that on our end we'd like, for efficiency purposes, to take a look at and see if we really need to continue in that manner. Another item is a police chief as far as his term of office. The way that the chief of police is scheduled at this point, we're having to call an election just specifically to elect a chief of police that doesn't coincide or it's not in line with the city council members' elections, which every time we do that, it costs the city about $32,000. Is that correct, Julia? So every time we do that, because it's on an off year, it costs the city money. So we're looking at maybe aligning the police chief with the council member elections. So that's another one that we felt was really important to address.
Just to make sure that citizens still select the police chief, because that always comes up. So
Yes,
this
ma'am.
is not about that. This is about something else.
That is correct.
Citizens will elect police chief.
And quite frankly, even with the charter election, they could say yay or nay, and say we're not interested in doing that part of it, So, but again, our whole deal here is to make sure that we can align it with city council members and really save us that money of doing an election on an off year. Okay, so, and then other items as directed by city council. So we kind of wanted to hear from you about what I just barely stated. But if you had any other thoughts on this as well.
One of the items that had also been talked about is the qualifications, meaning that a city council or mayor cannot owe the city's portion of property taxes. So no one can run for office if don't have a clean property tax paid.
Teresa has some thoughts on that as well, based on law.
Yes, there has not been a case that directly states that that is not something you can use to disqualify somebody from running, but there are a number of cases out there that say that any kind of financial considerations is impermissible. So myself and the Attorney General actually both think that even though there hasn't been a court that has actually ruled on it, it's probably in our best interest to stay away from those kind of restrictions.
So we can't discuss that, or you're saying we shouldn't discuss it?
You should not
Okay,
put that
so
on the charter.
we'll knock that out. Let me just be clear. What is it that you need for us? This is obviously, it says it's a discussion item, but what kind of a vote do you need or motion do you need on this, or do you need one?
We don't need one, Mayor. What we really need is just your input on what we're looking at as far as the potential charter election items. If you're in agreement with what I just presented, or you'd like to add to it or take away from it, we just wanted to hear from you.
All right, so just 1 minute. Tommy?
Question either for Teresa or Julia, I'm not sure which one. If we have a charter election, does that require that we appoint a charter review commission, or is that not necessary?
It's not necessary. The council can call an election, or the council can select a charter review committee.
Okay.
All right, and then, Harry, you look like you want to say something.
Just because I was on the last charter review committee when we presented several items, and one thing that didn't get clarified at the time was during that time frame that the police chief was up, and we were talking about that. Prior to that, that particular term of office was aligned directly with single-member districts 1, 3, and 5. And because it didn't get clarified at the specific time, that's the reason that the police chief term now is set that is at an off year. So I think that's what we want to try to do, is just get that back in alignment with 1, 3, and 5, and I think the citizens will want to try to support that so that we're not spending that additional $30,000 a year.
The only problem with that is that extends that office 4 years if you do it with 1, 3, and 5, because the next election would be for mayor and for districts 4 and 6. So at this point, you would want to realign it with districts 4 and 6 and the mayors. Right? Did I say that right?
Actually, that would be
Yeah.
a 1 year or
4
3 year.
I
Yeah.
don't get a vote?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Tom
Just
doesn't
gonna stay
need, Tom
here,
doesn't need to
Tom.
be reelected. He's just here.
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
what my point is the following is that if you aligned it with what Harry just said, you would be extending
3
the
years.
term of office 3 years. And I think the citizens want a strong vote on the police chief, so my recommendation is to align it with 6, 4, and the mayor, and 2. So that would be,
There's
4,
another
6 in
way
the
that you can do that, but I think we can work out the details prior to that. Is what you can do is have the police chief elected for a 3-year term the next time that he's elected, which is next year, and then from then on, have it all aligned with 1, 3, and 5. But we can details back, and we can just, we can have that prior to going to the election.
Yeah, we have to be really careful that I wouldn't do anything that's unfair to the chief either, so,
correct.
or that but regardless, yeah, I definitely understand that as
Well,
well.
you don't want to extend it to 3 years. You don't want the next one to be only 3 years. I mean, the most logical way to approach it is, because then you're still having another election, which is what he's saying costs us $32,000 if you
It's not
stick
get-
with it. And so
it's
the
already in
most
alignment with
important
what
part
we're
would be
already
to
gonna do, though,
align it
so.
with 6, 4, and 2 in the mayor's reelection.
And we could always word it to where we realigned one time to that, and then another time to go with 1, 3, and 5, and that way we have a citywide election every time.
Okay. Do I have from council any comments on any of the other items on here? So do you have the direction that you need?
We do, Mayor. I
Okay.
think we're good.
Then we move on to the next item.
Thank you so much.
The next item is consider adopting an abusive conduct policy, and Teresa, you're on for item G.
Ma'am, thank you. This is actually a policy that I've been working on for a while, and I thank Daniel for letting me bring it to you. It's actually something he could have approved himself just for an internal policy, but I thought it was important for you all to take a look at it and approve it so that we can be setting a standard overall for our community on how our employees are to be treated. And one of the things I really like about my job is that I get to work with employees on all levels of our organization, from the 4th floor, which is what we call Daniel, all the way down to, those people who answer the phone or who work in the field. And over the course of my 15-year career, I've noticed that the kinds of behavior that's directed towards city staff, particularly those employees that are frontline employees that are answering questions or solving problems for people, is becoming more and more coarse, and in lots of cases even abusive. We've taken some steps internally to help address that, because when they come to you and I have a question about how they've been treating somebody, they're not going to agree that they've been abusive to our employees. So some of the things that we've done is a lot of our phone lines now do record conversations. So if there is a question about somebody's behavior, we can review a phone call. Our conference rooms also have audio and video recording in them. So if there's a meeting that's held in those facilities, we can sometimes go back and look and see what happened. But the other thing that I'd like to do is pass a policy that kind of outlines what steps our employees can take to remove themselves from situations. So this policy deals with what we consider abusive conduct, and this isn't just angry citizens. We all understand that we do things that make people angry, but this is behavior that intimidates, offends, degrades, ridicules, or humiliates our employees. Some examples of these that I've seen, witnessed, or been told about by our employees includes things like staring or glaring or very aggressive, non-verbal ways people hold their bodies and are interacting with our employees, consistent ignoring and interrupting an employee when they're answering a question or explaining a rule, personal attacks, which include excessive profanity, name-calling, very personally directed name-calling, derogatory or hostile remarks about employee skills, training, or intelligence. Our employees, even though they are all highly competent, their intelligence and why we're city employees is questioned on a very frequent basis. This one's becoming more common as well, unreasonable interference with an employee's ability to do his or her work. This is repeated excessive emails, repeated excessive calling. I know in my office, there was a gentleman who wanted to speak to me, and I was in meetings pretty much that whole day, and I kept telling my staff, I'll call him back as soon as I have a chance. He ended up calling my office and the city manager's office over 72 times in that one day trying to reach me, and ended with, if she doesn't call me back in 15 minutes, I'm going to her house and this is her address. At which point, the police becomes involved in those kind of calls. But we don't want to have to get our police department involved in all of those calls. So the policy that we've outlined allows our employees to take some steps to protect themselves in those situations. One of the things they have to do is they have to tell the person, please stop the behavior. If you're being cursed at or the cursing's occurring on a phone call, to say, please stop the behavior. This is very common in non-governmental world to be able to say, if you continue cursing at me, I'm going to hang up. Also, in those meetings where people are being mistreated, I had one city employee who left a meeting, and I saw her right afterwards, and the word she used to describe how she felt about her treatment was eviscerated. Now, to me, that's a very strong word. So Again, giving employees the opportunity to tell them, if you don't stop this behavior, I'm going to leave the meeting or ask you to leave the meeting. But we also want to protect our citizens. We're not like any other business. The things that we offer, we're the only ones that offer those services. We're the only ones that offer water services. And so we want to make sure our employees are treating our citizens properly by having a process that if an employee decides to terminate a conversation or leave a meeting with somebody, they have to document that and provide it to the supervisor. Now, in my mind, that does a couple of things. One, it gives the supervisor an opportunity to call the person back and discuss what the issue was. Because in most cases, if I call them or Daniel calls them or Rick or Michael call them, they're going to behave a little bit better. Sometimes that's not necessarily true. But even, at the director level, it also helps us identify those people who are being abusive to all of our employees. As we talk about this, we've talked about this particular policy at directors meeting, and it seems like there's some individuals that, they exhibit this behavior with lots of different departments, and this will help us identify those individuals and see if there's better things we can do to help. It kind of helps us identify a larger security concern that's out there. I know that some of the language is becoming more violent. That's pretty rare at this point, but there are certainly things said on social media and to us that they're scary. I mean, and it's just scary language, and we want to make sure if that's happening that we're documenting it, so if it does reach the level where we can report it to the police, we have a record to go on. But I think, again, as I started, it also sets a standard of behavior for our community. We want you to tell them that, please don't treat our employees this way, because they will have opportunities to take care of that behavior. So I'm happy to take any questions.
So do we have a specific policy that's being put forward at this point? Are we just talking about you wanting to put one together?
No, there is a policy. It is in your packet,
Right.
and we can have that put out onto, we can have Anthony broadcast that as well. I know that Anthony and I discussed doing some of the social media kind of things that he does to let people know what kind of behavior we're talking about. But this is not behavior that any of us, in any circumstance, would think is okay. It's not just being angry about something. It is like aggressively name-calling and threatening our employees.
Mayor, and I do want to point out very, very briefly that the great majority of our citizens are very courteous. They deal with this very professionally. It's a handful of individuals that for some reason we have just struggled with. I heard a recording just recently that I just cringed. Our female employee at the water department handled herself really well, and she was berated. She was insulted, and it just went on and on and on. They'd hang up, and then that person would call back again and continue. But our employee was very, very professional, but she should have removed herself from that situation, though. So, again, we are trying to protect our not just our employees, but also make sure that we have better interaction even with our citizens. But, again, we're very appreciative of the interaction that we do have with a great majority of our citizens. It's just that handful that we're dealing with.
Do most cities have a policy such as this?
The cities that I'm aware of is just very limited, but Abilene, for instance, does not have a written policy, but the directors are told and employees do know that they do have the opportunity to leave or hang up on conversations. I thought it was important to put it as a written policy so that it's very standardized. You'll find employees even within our organization as we listen to phone calls of these people. Some of them are more willing to say than others, if you continue cursing at me, I'm going to hang up, and then they hang up. But there's others who believe that it is their responsibility to stay on that call and try to solve that problem, and they will stay. I mean, the one call that Daniel's referring to, that young woman was on the phone for over 5 minutes. And that's a long time to have somebody tell you how terrible you are for something that really she had no control over. So I think my preference is to have a written policy versus just giving authorization to employees to handle it. Again, to protect our public, to make sure we're doing our jobs, but also to document the kinds of behavior that we're seeing.
Tom or Tommy, you were going to make
I was going to ask a question. Teresa, does this cover, I know this may not be a verbal type assault, but, I am aware that there are some citizens that make voluminous records requests that I would consider abusive. Is that something that this would cover, or is that not anything that this would cover?
I'll let Julia answer that
Okay.
question.
That would not cover this, but it would cover the phone calls that are subsequently made to us if we don't respond as they see fit.
Okay. Because I know that's a problem as well.
It really is.
So that's another issue, I guess, for another entity besides the city.
Right, and we are looking at options. That's really going to have to come, I think, through a state statute
State level.
change.
Okay, all right.
And Lucy?
I just have a quick question. What was the consequences to this action? Say they do abuse the employees or whatever. What's the consequence to this?
Well, I think, it depends on who it is. If it's another employee, which I'm not aware of those situations. I think our employees are very respectful to each other generally. There can be discipline for that. If it's one of our contractors who's engaging that behavior, then we would have the opportunity to not hire them again as a contractor. You can do that. We can put them on a no-bid list where they can no longer bid on our contracts. Again, I don't think that has been an overwhelming concern. For citizens, the way we handle it now is the way I think we would continue handling it, is that we would just have somebody higher up, make the conversation, have a conversation with them about the way they're behaving. The purpose of documenting it is there are some statutes. There's assault, battery, harassment through electronic means, or other conduct of criminal nature that we might be able to make a police case. I know in the instance where the gentleman, offered to come by my house, it only took one call from Assistant Chief Fincher to convince him that probably wasn't a great idea. So we don't want to involve our police officers unnecessarily in these things, but the better documentation we have, the more likely we are to stop the really abusive contact.
I think it's kind of hard, perhaps, when you say consider adopting an abusive conduct policy without us knowing what the consequences are. I mean, it's one thing to have it and read it and say, okay, well, we don't like that, but so what? And what is the so what?
I think the so what immediately is that they won't get their answer immediately. If you're calling about your water bill and you're abusing our employee, you're not going to get that answer right there because the employee is going to leave the conversation. If it's, some other circumstance when you're in a meeting, we're going to terminate the meeting and you'll have to reschedule a meeting with somebody else present, such as one of the assistant city managers or the city manager. I don't think that this in any way is intended to say we're going to refuse service. We really can't do that. That won't be a consequence to them. It really will be more of a discussion about the behaviors and who they're going to deal with and how they should interact.
Should we make sure that as we discuss this that we have those remedies attached to this? Because I hate to pass something, push it forward and not say that, and as a city employee or what, these are the things that will happen should you do X, Y, and Z. I mean, I
can read the three things that are listed here. So it says an employee found engaging in abusive conduct will be disciplined up to and including immediate termination. Contractors found to be in violation of this policy may be subject to contract cancellation or disqualification from future contracts. Citizens who engage in abusive conduct towards employees may be asked to leave city facilities, and conversations with citizens who are engaging in this behavior may be terminated. So really, it is just a matter of we're going to not require this employee to stay in this situation for this moment. But again, they can come back and we will provide them services.
We want the employee to know that there's no repercussions for him or her removing themselves from that situation, and to know that where we have a course of action that we will follow as far as the supervisors above them as well. But we need them comfortable saying it's been documented, I know it's been recorded, I need to remove myself from this very, very uncomfortable situation. It's really what it's doing for us too, or doing for our employees.
Okay, so any other further questions or comments from council? Harry?
Teresa, I certainly appreciate this. I was a little surprised that we didn't have something like this. Most big businesses, Billy can attest to this, have something very, very similar to this because we don't want to put the employees at risk or have one employee take advantage of another for anything. So I certainly think this is something that the direction we need to go in, and I certainly support it.
Any further questions or
No,
comments?
I was just going to ask if we need a motion to.
I had a comment.
Tom.
Yeah. And I'm with you, Teresa. There's an accepted level of decency in a conversation and professionalism we expect no matter who we're talking to or who's talking to us. But when you deal with a lot of people and you're going to get somebody that's just mad on the phone and they may be not mentally competent enough to handle it and they're just going to get irate. I'm kind of with the mayor a little bit. How do we tell them, okay, we're stopping this conversation for now and you're going to this step? And that's the one I'm worried about. I want to see this take place, but I think some of these people, and I'll use this one because he's dead. I'll use my dad. Boy, he could get on the phone sometime and just deliver a 1929 lecture, and God only knows what he would call that person. He'd just be embarrassed to even say he's even kinfolk. But long story short is, that was just the mentality it was. But you had to go in and tell him, okay, here's your next step to go. You're not going to rid yourself of these calls, but we're going to have to be able, we know how to handle them in a process. And I'm afraid of that.
We can instruct our employees. Like I said, we're going to be doing some training with our employees on how they should appropriately handle this. They shouldn't just say, okay, goodbye, and hang up. But we can instruct them to tell them that a supervisor will be calling them back. Because as you listen to the calls, I mean, they are calls that they accelerate. And it gets to a point where the person, even if you're trying to help them, there's not going to be, so emotionally involved in the situation, they're not going to be listening to you anyway. So if that's helpful, that's the kind of instruction we want to give our employees, that they will be told if you hang up that somebody else will be contacting you, so they know that there's still service available to them. We can certainly add that to the policy.
I think there just needs to be some more conversation. I think we need to have some specific training attached to it and know that there's training attached to it, a better definition of consequences. You know, some people, I hate to say this, will treat a female different than a male on the phone. And some people believe females don't have the intelligence that a man does on many of these issues. So there are many different levels of this. I just don't feel comfortable approving it as presented today, because I think there's more research and more detail needed in it, but I believe it's necessary and an important part of what we need to do.
May I ask you, what additional research would you be looking for?
Not research, definition, policy,
Repercussions.
repercussions. You know, it's like a general thing. It's like when we pass an ordinance and it's like it's not defined. It's got what's enforceable. I mean, what is enforceable? What actions can be taken?
And I think,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Go
Mayor.
ahead.
But I think Teresa just read off to us what those consequences are. And, you know, there's a basic level of respect that I think everybody deserves, going both ways. And I certainly don't think city employees, because I've gotten some of those irate calls where I've, had to talk to people. I would hate for our city employees to be talked to the way I have over a vote that I have made. And, training certainly, getting the city employees or whomever it is comfortable saying, I'm sorry, I don't appreciate the way you're speaking with me, and we cannot continue this conversation, or I cannot continue this conversation if you continue to use language like that. But I can have my supervisor call you back. That doesn't take a whole lot of training, Mayor, and I just think, and we all lose it. I have lost it sometimes when I've, but fortunately over the years I've kind of learned how to dial it back a little. But I certainly think that this policy, and when I got this in my background package, my agenda and all, I thought the city does not have a policy that deals with something like this. And, so I read through it very carefully, and, I thought it covered all the bases, even the consequences of, as Teresa said, we can't stop city services, but we can ratchet it up the ladder all the way to Daniel or to you, Mayor, if it comes to that, for somebody that, has that characteristic to be ugly and abusive. So I think we ought to adopt the policy.
I'd make a motion that we adopt the policy as presented.
Any public comment?
Planning on that, but as far as the training, we do have an arm.
Could you tell us who you are?
Brian Kendrick, Human Resources Director. It's just so good to see you guys.
Welcome back.
We do have an arm that we can do that training through Human Resources, so we'll partner with Teresa to get that done. So I don't think that will be an issue. And I think, again, one of our biggest concerns is consistency throughout. And currently, we allow departments to set their own policies. And so I think it would be better to have an overarching policy that addresses this in a uniform approach for everyone, to make sure all citizens get treated the same way all the time. rather than there being a bunch of different standards out there.
And I don't, further public comment?
The HRC board, I just have a quick clarification from Teresa, and this is actually kind of funny that this was brought up today. I believe this needs to be extended to people that sit on city boards. We are not actually city employees, but we take an oath with the city. And it was actually just funny because having a conversation with a local business owner who's making plans on some things they wanted done, was accosted for voicing my opinion about how that, we're trying to keep the city, kind of in the same step and direction. And, it was, so I just wanted to clarify if it's going to, would that be covering?
We can certainly do
I
that.
think in the language, I think it should be written and that should be something that should be done.
Generally, our policies don't apply to anybody other than city employees because it's a city employee policy, but since we are essentially creating a community standard, we can certainly, add boards and commissions as well as council because I know they take lots of comments that are difficult to hear as well.
Further public comment? With no further public comment, we will take a vote. All in favor of item G, consider adopting abusive conduct policy, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. Motion passes 6-1. H, first public hearing and introduction of an ordinance amending the budget for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2018 and ending September 30th, 2019 for new programs and capital improvements. Tina?
Yes, ma'am. We have, I think, 5 budget amendments for you to present today. The first one deals with the storm damage that we just endured on May 18th. We're requesting $250,000 for disaster relief efforts from the landfill fund balance in the hopes that we may have some or all of that returned to us. The second one is for Time Clock Plus software. That will be your next agenda item. We are proposing to use interest income across all funds to fund the first year of that program. We did budget conservatively for interest, and so we do have a surplus in our interest revenue account, so that's how that would be funded. Facility improvements, this is for civic events. They're requesting to use $50,000 from fund balance for some facility improvements at civic events.
Do we know what they are?
I don't know if Sid or Carl is here.
Those are the ones that were brought forward in the past that council approved. We brought the remainder of those dollars that were left over from prior expenses and a new set of things we wanted to do with that remaining money.
Is that good? Do you want?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll ask questions in a minute.
Okay. For the Keep San Angelo Beautiful, or KSAB program, we're requesting to use $65,000 from the solid waste fund balance to fund that program. I believe that program is expected to last 3 years with the city funding and supporting it, and then it's supposed to endure as a standalone organization after that period of time. For the home fund, we received revenue in the amount of $10,000, which is recaptured funds, and so they're requesting to use that to further their home buyer assistance program. And also from CDBG and home funds, they're requesting the use of fund balance for citizen roof repair in the amount of $100,000 and animal shelter improvements that Morgan referenced earlier in her agenda item in the amount of $200,000. Those would come from fund balance from prior years, 452 and funds 452 and 482. And so where that that fund balance comes from is from program revenue, which is budgeted and received in an amount over the amount of expenditures in past years.
Or is that $200,000 the dollars that we use from excess tax revenue? Is that the $200,000 that we did last fall season?
This would be in addition to that amount and would come from the fund balance in Fund 482, which again, as I said, was program revenues in a prior year that were received and fell to fund balance.
Do we have, before we take a vote, do we have other things that are out there that we think are going to come forward instead of, approving some this month and then some next week and then,
Do them all at once, Mayor, is what you're
I
saying.
just think, because
So as far as
We don't
CDBG
have
and
an opportunity to prioritize here.
Well, as far as CDBG and home funds, these are within the Neighborhood and Family Services realm, and so are the use of the funds that are being requested. And this will bring their fund balances in those two funds to an amount where I would feel safe, probably not accessing those fund balances again in the near future.
Mayor, if I could,
Yes, sir.
Tina, you said this was pulling from fund balances in those funds. Those funds are restricted for certain uses, is that correct?
When they're program revenue, they're at the discretion of council to use as they see fit. But because they are within the Department of Neighborhood and Family Services, we would recommend using them for projects associated with that department.
So these are program revenues that came from CDBG and home-funded projects?
Right, outside of the grant dollars.
And so the program revenue went back into those funds. It's not general fund money,
That's exactly correct.
even though council has complete authority over that money?
Right.
Okay. The key there is it's not local tax money that was set aside in some previous council allocation. The origination of the monies came from grant programs that spun off some program income. That program income went into a fund balance, and that's what they're tapping now.
My comment wasn't relative to just these two items, just to be sure you understand that.
Yes, ma'am.
But it's still a relevant comment to these two items.
Sure it is, it just wasn't my comment, yeah. Thank you. Yes,
There's
Lucy?
Sydney back there. Can he review what we were wanting to know about?
Morning, Council, Mayor. The 50,000 was for the Paseo improvements that included the LED lighting, the parking lot maintenance that needed to be taken care of on the east and west side of the Paseo, and also the netting too as well for the Paseo.
Thank you.
And now you need a new roof on it?
That's right. We do need a
Thanks
partial.
to the storm.
Do we need to divert this money away from the items you just said and put it towards roof repair?
We're looking into that right now to see how much the estimates are for the cost to do the repairs, but that's what we're looking at right now. Hopefully, we can cover it with the budget that we have right now.
Okay, and then my next, I think, anyone have further questions for Sydney? Okay, then thank you very much. Then my other question is going back to, of course, the time clock plus item. Do we need to consider item I and then come back to item H? Because we haven't considered item I before we approve item H funds.
This is the first reading of the budget amendment, so the purchase of the Time Clock Plus would not go into effect until the second reading. It's just an approval, so it's kind of a toss-up. We wanted you to hear the budget amendment first, since you can't buy something without funding, but.
Okay, thank you. All right, do you have more? Okay, do I have any questions or further comments from council? So then, do I have a vote? Do we need to have an amendment?
Yeah, we need a motion.
We need a motion. So who would like to make a motion? Harry makes the motion. Who's seconding? Second by Tommy. Public comment? With none, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
None opposed. Motion passes 7-0. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, so tell me to shut up if I'm not. But I just want to make sure that.
Whoa, you really want us to?
No, but I volunteer. Freedom, yeah.
I volunteer.
Your freedom.
Said it,
Okay.
I didn't say it.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that my vote against the abusive conduct policy does not mean I believe that the citizens deserve to be abused. I do not believe they deserve to be abused. I just think more work needed to be done on it, but I don't believe employees deserve to be abused. So just to be clear on that.
And just to be clear, I'm with you on that, and the reason I voted is because Brian came up and said he was going to follow up with that is the only reason I went with it.
So
I'm
we're
with you.
both on that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for the clarification, Mayor.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Okay, so now we're going to go to item I, consider awarding an agreement to Data Management Incorporated, or Time Clock Plus, under Texas DIR contract number DIR TSO 3448, in an amount not to exceed $250,000 in fiscal year 2019 and $55,000 annually beginning of fiscal year 2020, and authorizing the city manager to execute all related documents. Brian, you're on again.
Ryan Kendrick, Human Resources Director. I'll do it right this time. It is good to see all you again. So one of the first conversations that Teresa and I had after I moved over to Human Resources was related to how we would attain best practices related to the Fair Labor Standards Act. As that legislation has changed over time and as it has evolved, we as a city have not built in the best practices that would achieve compliance with that. So over that discussion, we both agreed that we needed to look at some way to update and modernize the way we do it. Time entry software, we believe, would be the best solution for this. It gives us the tools necessary to maintain that FLSA compliance, and it also gives us the ability to protect the quality of our records for any kind of auditing. So with that in mind, we know that there's a couple of priorities that we needed to look at. One of them was, of course, we know City Council is interested in keeping business local if we can. And we are extremely lucky that we have an international time entry software company in our backyard. And we verified, one of our concerns was we verified that Time Clock Plus was a premier partner with our software system. And that's a huge consideration. So that's a big component that we can check off. They're local, we can check that off. And then the other concern was we want to make sure that we're, having a fair purchasing process according to state law. So we have verified that Time Clock Plus is registered with the Texas Department of Information Resources. That means they've been vetted and are considered competitively bid, satisfying all the requirements under the local government code. So with that being said, I'm going to turn over for a little bit of a presentation to some of the representatives of Time Clock Plus, Brandon Corbin, who another note that I'll just make is one of the questions I asked is what happens if one of those proximity readers goes out? What is the process to get that replaced? And he said, I'll hop in my car and bring it over. So that we could not get from a different company. So
Local's always good.
Yeah. Mayor and Council, thank you very much for your time and attention this morning. As Director Kendrick said, I'm Brandon Corbin. I'm a sales executive for Time Clock Plus. We go all over the country and internationally having these kind of conversations. So what we've done here is prepared a little bit of an executive summary to give you an overview of us as a company, the background of the project, and some of the things that will be keys in that. And then, of course, we want to save time to answer any questions that you might have to make sure you understand it and feel comfortable with the project moving forward. As we get into that portion, I also want to introduce you to Juanita Hall. Juanita is a technical expert in the software, so she's worked in various different departments of both development and support. And again, she's one of our absolute best. I wouldn't have anyone else here with me to answer any questions that you have about how the software actually works. And then representing our executive team here is Trey Watts. Trey is our Chief Revenue Officer. So he's the executive sponsor on the project from our side, and we're excited to have his support here. Okay, so Brian did a great job of kind of setting the stage, but we were initially brought in because of the things that Teresa and Brian initially discovered, and that we wanted to improve some of the accuracy of the processes as they existed today. And very quickly we found out that one of the keys to finding the correct partner was going to be that you needed an organization that had the flexibility to capture the diversity of needs. As you guys can imagine, fire department has a very different need than a water department or from a streets department, and that's one of the beautiful things about a municipal government is that you have a lot of different small organizations under the same umbrella. So when I initially started talking to Brian and going through some of the things that make us unique, it was really exciting to hear how well aligned our organization was with the project at hand and with what the city is needing currently. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen our logo around, I hope, in the community. To give you a little bit of our background, Time Clock Plus is a 30-year veteran of the time and attendance industry. And we're very proud to say that nationally and now internationally, we are the #2 provider of these kind of time and attendance systems that's on the market currently. If you switch that to specifically public sector, we're actually the #1 provider. And again, that flexibility that our system offers is a big part of that because it's an absolute necessity. We're also very proud to pass on that we have 300 families that are supported by Time Clock Plus in our headquarters here in San Angelo, Texas. And we're involved with and support over 30 different charitable organizations here in the community as well. So as we get into a little bit of the scope, so it's easy to say, yeah, we're #2, but I actually pulled some numbers. We're currently serving 60,000 separate organizations internationally in 37 countries. So it's easy to drive by the building and not understand the scope of the importance of the work that's going on there and how many different organizations are supported by our company. Specifically as we transition to the case for change, so why this is an important project, what are some of the things that these kind of projects are able to return? I like to reference third-party research. So kind of starting out here, this first one, Aberdeen Group, is an independent consulting and research firm. In their research, they found that these kind of projects where you take a manual, largely self-reported process and you automate it, you actually have overtime costs that are unplanned driven down by 7%, and your total overtime costs down by 19%. Transitioning to the American Payroll Association, we were just in California last week at their national conference there. They find that time theft costs organizations up to 5% of their gross payroll. In our experience, most of that's unintentional. Most employees know when they're reporting their hours, they just maybe didn't pay as much attention as they might have, but those little minutes here and there add up to, in a lot of cases, and in our personal experience, between 2 and 5% of your gross payroll. So that would be a big part of the ROI that we would be able to project with the project. And then specifically, the Department of Labor has been active in public sector, and they gave us some statistics. In 2014, they paid out $240 million in back wages, and that included 270,000 employees that had errors or inaccuracies in their compensation. We arrive at this point in many cases with a city or a state organization after something has happened. So I want to recognize the council and the city employees for being proactive in addressing this. And then specifically in Texas, we currently serve 92 Texas cities. We pulled some together that are some of the more relevant from a size and scope standpoint, just to give you a little bit of a fact check there that we are working with some of your peer cities that I'm sure you interact with. Austin, Midland, Grand Prairie, Denton, Grapevine, Big Springs on that list. I know we've had some conversations with them. So specific, I know we talked about prioritizing local in our state here. We're very experienced in exactly what we need to do in Texas specifically. And then Brian also mentioned Central Square Technologies is a leader in municipal software systems, and the city currently uses them for financial solutions. And if you were to call them and say, hey, we're starting a time and attendance project, we need to revamp this, they would say you need to talk to Time Clock Plus. We're their preferred partner. They actually, to customers that aren't in the same city, they would even be able to come and present to you on our solution. They resell it. So that was exciting as well, that the solution that we have one of the closest relationship with actually is in place here. And that lets us leverage our combined experience and maximize the benefit of the solution so that you have the best possible impact of your investment there. And then finally, we talked about it when Brian asked me, what happens if we break one of these things? We literally will be able to hop in the car and drive over. That's a rare commodity that we have the local strategy here. And let's just say we were in California right now instead of in Texas. Time Clock Plus has an absolute focus on our service level. So when a customer of any kind needs help, they are able to pick up the phone and talk to a Time Clock Plus expert. We made the conscious decision to maintain all of our support and professional services teams, and those are the people that get things set up in the beginning and configured in our headquarters here in San Angelo. And as most of you have experienced, in a lot of technology companies, those functions are outsourced or they're now being handled by robotics. So it's something we're very passionate about, and we're very excited to be able to potentially serve the community where we work and we serve and our families all live. So With that being said, we'll open it up to questions and anything that the council would like to know more about.
Do I have questions or comments? Billy?
My questions in no way are intended to say that I don't think we should go local. Absolutely, 100%. I support us going local for this. But you mentioned being number 2. Who's number 1?
Kronos Corporation out of Massachusetts is the number one provider in time and attendance. And most of their focus is on Fortune 500 enterprise level organizations, both nationally and internationally.
So do you support enterprise operations?
We do, yes, ma'am. We have some very large organizations that use us. We have everything from 2-employee companies all the way to some of the more recognizable American brands that use Time Clock Plus.
So are you familiar with Ultimate Software Solutions?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay, so what services might they offer that Time Clock Plus doesn't?
Ultimate Software is a competitor of ours. They're more of a comprehensive municipal solution, so they would have a lot of overlap with your Central Square technologies in the offerings that they had. Time Clock Plus is a specialist and an expert in time and attendance alone, and that's intentional. We don't, do human resources or finance or payroll or any of those kind of things. So Ultimate Software is more of an umbrella company.
All right, thank
Do
you.
I have further questions or comments, Harry?
Just a real quick comment. I think in the long run, this particular type of thing will help with efficiency. It'll also help with some of the reports that we've got to generate. So really, having a homegrown company come in and do this, I fully support this.
Do I have any further questions or comments from council? If not, may I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Lane makes a motion, and the second is by Tommy. Is there any public comment? With no public comment, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
With no one opposing, motion passes 7-0. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brandon.
We will now move into item J, which is an update on sales tax revenue performance. Tina?
We have good news again this month, Mayor. The sales tax for May was at 5.82% compared with the same month in the prior year. And we're currently over budget for our revenue budget by almost $903,000 year to date. And then, of course, I have your slide here for April. This always lags a month because it takes us some time to get it into our system. But for April, everything was up slightly other than professional services was just down a tiny bit in April of 2019. So.
Thank you. I want to remind everyone that in a discussion with City Council, we agreed and supported that any excess sales tax revenue would go towards street infrastructure improvements, and I want to remind everybody once again of that. But I also think an important thing to bring up right now is that I'm excited that we plan very conservatively, because if you take a look at our sister cities for the same time period, you'll find that Abilene was down, Midland was up, but Odessa was down, and Wichita Falls was barely up. So obviously there are some dynamics changing, and I am thankful that we planned conservatively, and I'm thankful that we have over $900,000 at this point that will go towards street and infrastructure improvements. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
With that, we will move into item 8, which is closed session. Executive session under the provision of Government Code Title V, Open Government Ethics, Subtitle A, Open Government, Chapter 551, Open Meetings, Subchapter D, exceptions to requirement that meetings be open under the following sections. A, Section 551.0712, consult with attorney when the governmental body seeks the advice of its attorney on a matter in which the duty of the attorney to the governmental body under the Texas disciplinary rules of professional conduct of the State Bar of Texas clearly conflicts with this chapter regarding water rights and contracts for Lake Nasworthy. We will be adjourned for approximately 1 hour. We will return and follow up with the rest of the agenda. Back to order at 12:42. There are no announcements from the closed session, so on the follow-up and administrative issues, we will move to item B, consider approving various board nominations. The Zoning Board of Adjustment, Bobby Guerrera, SMD 2, to first term ending January 2021. It's the only one. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any public comment? With no public comment, we'll move to approve. Vote. All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? Appointment made. Item C, discussion and consideration of September meeting schedule. I asked to have this put back on because Labor Day weekend, our first meeting would be the day after Labor Day, and a lot of people travel. And I was just wondering if we couldn't move it at least just to Wednesday and not that Tuesday. That way city staff can come back and get ready. Does that bother anybody?
Works for me.
Okay, so we'll move
Sounds
to
good,
move that
Susan.
meeting from the first Tuesday, which is after Labor Day, to that Wednesday, same time. Okay? Now, announcements and consideration of future agenda items. I think we gave some today that need to be done. Is there any additional items from anyone? With none, we'll move on to an adjournment. Do I have a motion
Move
for
we
adjournment?
adjourn.
Okay, and a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Let's do it.